Hello, friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. The dispatch center in Millbrook, Pennsylvania operated like clockwork on most nights. Officer Chester Brennan had been patrolling the quiet residential streets of Oak Grove neighborhood for the better part of 3 hours when the call came through at 11:47 p.m. on a humid Thursday evening in August. Unit 7, we have a 911 hang-up at 1847 Sycamore Lane. The dispatcher's voice crackled through his radio. Caller ID shows Mildred Hutchinson, 82-year-old female. Line still open, but no one's responding. Can you perform a welfare check? Chester pulled his cruiser to the curb and grabbed his radio. Unit 7, copy that. En route to 1847 Sycamore. ETA 3 minutes. He knew the house. A weathered Victorian that sat at the end of a tree-lined street, its paint peeling in places, but otherwise well-maintained. Mildred Hutchinson had lived there alone since her husband passed away 6 years ago. Chester had responded to a few minor calls there over the years. A broken window from neighborhood kids throwing rocks, a complaint about a stray dog digging up her garden. Nothing serious. The street was darker than usual as Chester turned onto Sycamore Lane. 3 streetlights were out, leaving long shadows between the pools of amber light from the remaining lamps. He pulled up to the curb in front of 1847 and killed the engine. The house stood dark, except for a faint glow emanating from what appeared to be the kitchen window on the side. Chester grabbed his flashlight and stepped out of the cruiser. The night air was thick with moisture, and crickets chirped steadily from the overgrown hedges that bordered the property. He walked up the cracked concrete pathway to the front porch, his boots crunching on dried leaves that had gathered despite it being late summer. The porch light was off. Chester knocked firmly on the heavy wooden door. Mrs. Hutchinson, Millbrook Police. We received a 911 call from this address. No response. He knocked again, harder this time. Mrs. Hutchinson, if you can hear me, please come to the door or make some noise to let me know you're okay. Still nothing. Chester tried the doorknob. Locked. He walked around to the side of the house where he'd seen the light. The kitchen window was too high to see through clearly, but the light was definitely on inside. He continued to the back of the house, his flashlight beam sweeping across an overgrown backyard. A rusty swing set stood in one corner, a remnant from when the Hutchinsons' grandchildren used to visit. The back door was slightly ajar. Chester's hand instinctively moved to his service weapon, though he didn't draw it. Mrs. Hutchinson? He called through the gap. This is Officer Brennan with Millbrook Police. I'm coming inside to check on you. He pushed the door open with his flashlight hand, keeping his other hand near his weapon. The door creaked on its hinges, revealing a narrow hallway that led toward the kitchen. The house smelled musty, with an underlying scent Chester couldn't quite place. Something sweet and cloying. Police! Mrs. Hutchinson, are you home? The kitchen light cast long shadows down the hallway. Chester moved forward slowly, his senses heightened. In his 12 years on the force, he'd learned to trust his instincts, and right now something felt off. The kitchen was empty but showed signs of recent activity. A pot of water sat on the stove, still steaming slightly, though the burner was off. A cutting board on the counter held half-chopped vegetables, carrots and celery, their edges just beginning to brown. A knife lay beside them. Chester noticed the phone first. An old corded model mounted on the wall, its receiver dangling by its spiral cord, swaying slightly. He could hear the faint buzz of the dial tone. Dispatch, this is Unit 7. Chester said into his radio. I'm inside the residence. Back door was open. Kitchen phone is off the hook. No sign of Mrs. Hutchinson yet. Continuing to search the premises. Copy that, Unit 7. Backup is available if needed. Stand by. Chester moved through the kitchen into the dining room. The table was set for one, a plate, silverware, and a glass of what looked like iced tea, untouched. Beyond the dining room was the living room, shrouded in darkness. Chester's flashlight beam cut through the black, illuminating worn furniture covered in crocheted doilies and dozens of framed photographs on every surface. A sound from upstairs made him freeze. A soft thump, like something being dropped. Mrs. Hutchinson, this is the police. I'm coming upstairs. The stairs creaked under his weight as he ascended, keeping his flashlight trained ahead. The second-floor hallway stretched in both directions. To the left, a bathroom door stood open, the white tiles gleaming in his flashlight beam. To the right, 3 closed doors. Another thump, clearer now, from behind the door at the end of the hall. Chester approached carefully. The door was painted white but showed years of wear, with chips and scratches around the handle. He knocked. Mrs. Hutchinson? A sound from inside, not quite a voice, more like a muffled moan. Chester tried the handle. Locked. Mrs. Hutchinson, I need you to unlock this door, or I'm going to have to force entry. The moaning sound came again, more urgent this time. Chester stepped back and drove his shoulder into the door. The old wood splintered around the lock, and the door swung open. His flashlight beam swept across the room, and what he saw made him reach immediately for his radio. The bedroom was in complete disarray. Furniture overturned, lamp broken on the floor, curtains torn from their rods, and in the corner, partially hidden behind an overturned dresser, was Mildred Hutchinson. She was bound to a chair with what looked like electrical cord, a gag tied around her mouth. Her eyes were wide with terror, darting between Chester and something else. Something behind him. Chester spun around just as a figure lunged from behind the door. He had a split second to register a dark hoodie and something metallic flashing in the dim light before his training kicked in. He sidestepped, bringing his flashlight up to block what he now saw was a crowbar. The impact jarred his arm, sending the flashlight spinning across the floor. The attacker was already moving for another strike. Chester grabbed for his weapon, but the figure barreled into him, driving him back against the wall. They grappled in the darkness, Chester using his size advantage to keep the crowbar at bay. He could hear Mildred's muffled screams through her gag. Chester managed to get leverage and threw the attacker off, sending them stumbling into the hallway. He drew his weapon. Stop! Police! The figure didn't hesitate, bolting down the hallway toward the stairs. Chester pursued, calling into his radio. Unit 7, requesting immediate backup. Suspect fleeing on foot, possible assault in progress. The attacker crashed down the stairs, Chester close behind. They burst through the front door, which Chester now realized had been unlocked from the inside, and out into the night. Chester followed, but the figure had already vanished into the shadows between the houses. He stood on the front lawn, breathing hard, scanning the darkness. Then he remembered Mildred. Racing back upstairs, he found her still tied to the chair, tears streaming down her face. He carefully removed the gag. It's okay, Mrs. Hutchinson. You're safe now. Are you hurt? She gasped for air, her voice raspy. He was in the house when I got home from church. Made me call 911, then hung up. Said he wanted to see how long it would take for someone to come. Chester began untying her bonds, noting the red marks on her wrists where she'd struggled against them. Did you recognize him? Can you describe him? She shook her head. He wore that hood the whole time. But Chester... She looked up at him with those terrified eyes. He knew things. Knew I was alone. Knew my routine. And he said this was just practice. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Chester helped Mildred to her feet, supporting her weight as she swayed slightly. Practice for what? He didn't say, but he kept checking his watch, timing everything. How long for you to arrive, how long to search the house. He was standing right behind that door the whole time you were downstairs, just waiting. Chester felt a chill despite the humid night air. He guided Mildred toward the stairs as backup units arrived, their lights painting the house in alternating red and blue. But even as he helped her outside to the waiting paramedics, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. The attacker had been testing response times, studying police procedures, and somewhere out there in the darkness of Millbrook, he was likely already planning his next move. Floyd Morrison watched from his bedroom window across the street as the police cars multiplied in front of Mildred's house. He'd been suffering from insomnia again, a problem that had plagued him since his wife died 2 years ago. He'd seen the first officer arrive. Chester, he thought, recognizing the tall figure even in the dark. Then came the commotion, someone running from the house, though he couldn't make out details from this distance. Now, as he watched them help Mildred into an ambulance, Floyd noticed something that made his blood run cold. In his own backyard, barely visible in the shadows by his garden shed, stood a figure in a dark hoodie. The person was perfectly still, watching the scene across the street. Floyd reached for his phone to call 911, but when he looked back, the figure was gone. Had he imagined it? These days, he couldn't always trust his tired eyes. But as he continued to watch the police process the scene, he noticed something else. Fresh footprints in his garden, leading from the shed to his back door. With trembling fingers, Floyd checked the lock on his bedroom door, then pushed his heavy dresser in front of it for good measure. He'd tell the police in the morning, he decided, if there was anything to tell, if he hadn't just imagined the whole thing. But deep down, Floyd knew he hadn't imagined anything. Someone had been in his yard, watching, waiting, and somehow Floyd had the terrible feeling that this was all connected to something much larger than a simple break-in. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of Chester's apartment as his alarm clock showed 5:30 a.m. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Mildred's terrified face, heard her words echoing, "This was just practice." His phone rang. It was Chief Harrison from the station. "Chester, we need you here. Floyd Morrison called in about 20 minutes ago. Says he saw someone in his yard last night during the incident." "I'll be right there." Chester threw on his uniform and drove to the station. The bullpen was already busy despite the early hour, with officers from the night shift staying late to assist with the investigation. Floyd Morrison sat in one of the interview rooms, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. "Mr. Morrison, I'm Officer Brennan. You were at the scene last night?" Floyd looked up with bloodshot eyes. "I live across from Mildred. Saw everything from my window. But that's not why I'm here." His voice dropped to a whisper. "He was in my yard too. Watching." Chester pulled out his notepad. "Tell me exactly what you saw." "After you chased him from Mildred's house, I kept watching from my bedroom window. Maybe 5 minutes later, I saw him, standing by my garden shed, just standing there, still wearing that dark hoodie. He was watching all the police cars, all the commotion." "Did he do anything? Make any movements?" Floyd shook his head. "Just stood there for maybe 30 seconds. I reached for my phone to call 911, but when I looked back, he was gone." "But Officer Brennan..." Floyd's hands trembled. "There were footprints all around my house, fresh ones in the garden soil." Chester felt his pulse quicken. "Mr. Morrison, did you check if anything was disturbed? Any signs someone tried to get in?" "I was too scared to leave my room. Barricaded the door and waited for sunrise." Floyd's voice cracked. "My wife, Patricia, died 2 years ago. I'm alone in that house. What if he comes back?" "We're going to check your property thoroughly, Mr. Morrison. In the meantime, do you have somewhere else you can stay?" Floyd shook his head. "Patricia's family lives in Florida. I don't really have anyone nearby." Chester made arrangements for Floyd to stay at a local motel under police protection, then drove to Floyd's house with a crime scene unit. The morning dew made the footprints in the garden even more visible. They circled the house, paused at several windows, and concentrated heavily around the back door and basement window. "Look at this," Officer Janet Mills called from the basement window. Fresh tool marks scarred the wooden frame. "Someone definitely tried to force this." Chester examined the marks. They were recent, the exposed wood still pale and clean. The perpetrator had given up, perhaps scared off by the approaching sirens. "He was looking for another target," Chester said. "When I interrupted him at Mildred's, he came here. Floyd was probably next." They spent the next 2 hours processing the scene, taking photographs and castings of the footprints. Chester was examining the back door when his radio crackled. "All units, we have another 911 hang-up. 21005 Birch Street. Caller identified as 75-year-old female living alone." Chester's blood ran cold. Birch Street was only 4 blocks away. "Unit 7 responding," he called, already running to his cruiser. He arrived at 2105 Birch Street in under 2 minutes. The house was a small bungalow with an overgrown lawn. The front door was closed, but Chester noticed immediately that one of the front windows was open, its screen lying on the ground below. He called for backup, then approached the window carefully. Through the gap, he could see into a living room. A telephone sat on a side table, its receiver off the hook. "Police! Is anyone inside?" No response. Chester made a quick decision. He climbed through the window, drawing his weapon as he landed inside. The house was eerily quiet, except for the dial tone buzzing from the phone. The living room showed signs of a struggle. A lamp knocked over, magazines scattered across the floor, a chair overturned. Chester moved deeper into the house, checking each room methodically. In the kitchen, he found her. An elderly woman was tied to a kitchen chair with what looked like clothesline. Unlike Mildred, she wasn't gagged. Her head hung forward, gray hair obscuring her face. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Brennan. Are you hurt?" She lifted her head slowly, and Chester saw she'd been crying, but there was something else in her eyes. Confusion. I don't understand what's happening," she said. "A man came through my window. He made me call 911 and hang up. Then he tied me here and said to wait for the police. But he also said..." She paused, fresh tears falling. "He said to give you a message." Chester began untying her while calling for paramedics. "What message?" "He said to tell Officer Chester that he's disappointed, that you were supposed to come alone to Mildred's house, that you weren't supposed to call for backup so quickly." Chester's hands stilled on the ropes. "He knew my name?" The woman nodded. "He said you ruined the game by being too careful. He said..." She struggled to remember the exact words. "He said next time, he'll make sure you don't have a choice." "Did you see his face? Can you describe him?" "Young man, maybe mid-20s. Thin. He had these eyes. Cold, like he was looking through me instead of at me. And he smelled strange, like copper and something chemical." Chester finished untying her as backup arrived. While paramedics checked on the victim, Mrs. Helen Grant, he learned, Chester surveyed the scene more carefully. This felt different from the attack on Mildred. More controlled, less chaotic. As if the perpetrator was refining his method. On the kitchen counter, he found something that made his stomach turn. A police scanner, the kind anyone could buy at an electronics store. It was tuned to their dispatch frequency. "He's been listening," Chester told his sergeant when he arrived. He heard every call, every response. Sergeant Roger Davies, a veteran cop with 30 years on the force, studied the scanner. "This changes things. He knows our protocols, our response patterns. We need to switch to encrypted channels. That'll take time we don't have. Then we need to catch him first." They spent the rest of the morning canvassing the neighborhood. Several residents mentioned seeing a dark van in the area over the past week. Always at night, always moving slowly as if the driver was looking for something or someone. Chester was interviewing a neighbor when his personal cell phone rang. The number was blocked. "Hello? Officer Brennan." The voice was young, male, calm. "I'm disappointed in you." Chester signaled frantically to Davies, who immediately called for a trace. "Who is this?" "You know who I am, or at least you should. You've been in my practice rooms." "Practice for what?" A soft laugh. "You really don't remember, do you? 3 years ago, October 15th, you responded to a call about an elderly woman being threatened. You arrived, you made a decision, and someone died." Chester's mind raced. October 15th, 3 years ago. There had been an incident. "You're thinking about it now, aren't you?" The voice continued. "Starting to remember. The man you killed. You didn't even try to talk him down. 3 shots, center mass. By the book, they said. Justified, they said. The memory clicked into place. A domestic disturbance call that had escalated. The suspect had been aggressive, possibly armed. Chester had fired when the man made a sudden movement. "He was reaching for a weapon," Chester said. "He was reaching for his inhaler. He was having a panic attack. The weapon they found was a pocket knife in his jacket, still folded. His name was Timothy Carlson. He was my brother." Chester's blood ran cold. "Listen, I understand you're angry." "Angry?" The voice remained eerily calm. "No, Officer Brennan, I'm not angry. I'm teaching you a lesson. You need to understand what it feels like to be helpless, to watch someone you're supposed to protect suffer because of your decisions. These women have nothing to do with this. Neither did my brother. He was sick, scared. The elderly woman who called? She admitted later she overreacted, but it was too late, wasn't it? You'd already played judge, jury, and executioner. Where are you? Let's talk about this face to face." Another soft laugh. "We will. Soon. But first, you have more lessons to learn. Check your radio, Officer Brennan." The line went dead. Immediately, Chester's radio came to life. "All units, multiple 911 hang-ups reported. Addresses are 1776 Oak Drive, 900 Elm Court, and 3421 Pine Avenue. All callers are elderly females living alone." 3 simultaneous calls. Chester looked at Davies, who was already coordinating response teams. "He's escalating," Davies said. "We need every available unit." "No," Chester said suddenly. "That's what he wants. To spread us thin." He grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, can you call back those numbers?" There was a pause, then, "Unit 7, we've got callbacks on all 3. The residents say they didn't call 911. He's spoofing the calls, Chester realized. "Creating false alarms to distract us. The real target is somewhere else." But where? Chester thought about the pattern. Mildred, then the attempt on Floyd, then Helen Grant, all within a 6-block radius, all elderly, living alone. He pulled up a map on his phone, marking the locations. "There," he pointed to a spot in the center. 1950 Sycamore Lane, right in the middle of his hunting ground. "And I know who lives there. Dorothy Patterson, 81, widowed last year." They raced to the address, no sirens this time. The house appeared quiet, but the front door was slightly open. Chester and Davies approached carefully, weapons drawn. Inside, they found Dorothy Patterson in her living room, untied and unharmed, but clearly terrified. She was sitting rigidly in her armchair, staring at something on the coffee table. It was a photo of Chester at the police academy graduation, with a red X drawn over his face. Next to it was a timer, counting down. It had 4 minutes and 30 seconds left. "He was here," Dorothy whispered. "Said when the timer reaches 0, someone dies. Said you have to choose. Stay here with me or try to save someone else." But you can't do both. Chester picked up the photo. On the back was written, Floyd's Motel, Room 12, choose wisely. Floyd. Chester had sent him to a motel for protection, but somehow the perpetrator knew exactly where. 3 minutes, 50 seconds. Davies, stay with Mrs. Patterson, Chester ordered, already moving. Send units to the Riverside Motel, Room 12, now! Chester ran to his cruiser and floored it. The Riverside Motel was 8 minutes away under normal conditions. He had less than 3 minutes. He wove through traffic, ran red lights, pushed the cruiser to its limits. His radio crackled with updates. Units were responding, but were farther away than he was. 2 minutes. Chester screeched into the motel parking lot and sprinted to room 12. The door was open. Inside, Floyd was tied to a chair, a device strapped to his chest with wires running to what looked like a car battery. A note was pinned to his shirt. You saved the wrong one. 1 minute. Chester examined the device. It was crude, but potentially lethal. Essentially a homemade defibrillator set to deliver a massive shock. The timer on Dorothy's table was probably synchronized to a remote trigger. 30 seconds. Chester couldn't see an obvious way to disarm it without potentially triggering it. He made a decision. He grabbed the battery and yanked it away from the device, throwing it across the room. The wires sparked and smoked, but the connection was broken. The timer in his head hit 0. Nothing happened. Floyd was sobbing with relief as Chester untied him. He said you'd have to choose, that you couldn't save everyone. But Chester had. This time. His phone rang again. The same blocked number. Impressive, Officer Brennan. You're learning. But the lesson isn't over. Check the news. Chester pulled up a news app on his phone. The breaking news headline made his heart sink. Elderly woman found dead in home. Police suspect connection to recent attacks. The address was 2847 Maple Street, 6 blocks from Dorothy Patterson's house, in the opposite direction from the motel. While Chester had been racing to save Floyd, while units had been responding to the false alarms and protecting Dorothy, the killer had struck again. The victim was Margaret Thompson, 79, living alone. You can't save them all, the voice said. Just like you couldn't save my brother. The game continues, Officer Brennan, and it's going to get much worse. The Millbrook Police Department had transformed into a fortress of activity. State police had arrived, FBI consultants were setting up equipment, and every available officer had been called in. Chester stood before a board covered with photos, maps, and timelines, his eyes burning from lack of sleep. Margaret Thompson's crime scene photos were the latest addition. Unlike the others, she hadn't been tied up. She'd been forced to take an overdose of her own heart medication. The killer had stayed with her, watching her die, then positioned her body peacefully in her bed with her hands folded over her chest. He's evolving, said Agent Sarah Hendricks from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. The first attacks were about control and fear. This one was about making a point. He wanted her to die slowly, wanted her to know it was happening. Chester stared at Margaret's photo. She looked peaceful, almost like she was sleeping. But the medical examiner had found something disturbing, traces of tears that had dried on her cheeks. She'd been crying when she died. We've identified him, Chief Harrison announced, entering the room with a file. Timothy Carlson's younger brother, David Carlson, 27. Dropped off the grid 18 months ago after his mother's death. She never recovered from losing Timothy. Chester took the file, studying David Carlson's photo. Thin face, hollow eyes, unremarkable features. The kind of person you'd pass on the street without a second glance. His mother died of an overdose, Harrison continued. Ruled accidental, but David claimed she was driven to it by grief. He blamed the department, specifically you, Chester. So this is revenge. It's more than that, Agent Hendricks interjected. He's trying to recreate his family's tragedy in others. Elderly victims like his mother, forced overdoses, the feeling of helplessness. He wants you to experience what he experienced, watching people die and being unable to stop it. Chester's phone buzzed. Another blocked call. The room fell silent as he answered on speaker. David, we know who you are. It's over. Do you? David's voice was calm as ever. Then you know this won't end until you understand, until you feel what I felt. Your brother's death was a tragedy, but stop. For the first time, emotion crept into David's voice. Don't you dare call it a tragedy. Tragedies are accidents. What you did was a choice. He was aggressive, potentially armed. He was autistic, David shouted, then caught himself, returning to his eerie calm. High functioning, but he didn't process stress well. That's why he was having a meltdown. The elderly woman, Mrs. Pearson, she knew him. She'd called the police before when he got agitated, and they'd always talked him down. But not you. You were new to the neighborhood. You didn't know him. You just saw a threat. Chester felt the weight of every eye in the room on him. He remembered that night more clearly now. The man had been agitated, pacing, making sudden movements. Chester had ordered him to stop, to show his hands, but he hadn't complied. I followed protocol, Chester said quietly. Protocol? David laughed bitterly. Tell that to my mother. Tell that to Margaret Thompson. David, please. No one else has to die. You're right. Only one more person has to die. You. The line went dead. Agent Hendricks immediately began coordinating protection details for Chester, but he waved her off. He doesn't want to kill me. Not yet. He wants me to suffer first. His radio crackled. All units, we have a situation at Millbrook Senior Center. Multiple 911 calls reporting a man with a gun. The senior center. It was Friday afternoon, bingo day. There would be over 100 elderly people there. Chester was moving before anyone could stop him. He took an unmarked car, knowing David would be watching for his cruiser. The senior center was a 10-minute drive. He made it in 6. The parking lot was chaos. People were streaming out of the building, some in wheelchairs, others using walkers, all terrified. Chester pushed through the crowd, looking for David. Officer! An elderly man grabbed his arm. He's in the main hall. He has hostages. Chester called for backup, then entered the building. The main hall was at the end of a long corridor. He could hear voices, one calm, one pleading. He approached carefully, peering around the doorframe. David stood in the center of the room, but he didn't have a gun. He was holding something else, a device similar to what he'd strapped to Floyd, but more sophisticated. Around him, seated at tables, were 20 elderly people, too frail or scared to run. Each had a small device attached to their clothing. I know you're there, Officer Brennan, David called without looking. Please, come in. We've been waiting. Chester entered slowly, hands visible. David, let these people go. They're free to leave whenever they want, David said, turning to face him. He looked even thinner in person, gaunt, with dark circles under his eyes. But I should mention that these devices are synchronized, if anyone moves more than 50 feet from this transmitter. He held up the device in his hand. They all activate. Basically, they'll all have simultaneous heart attacks. Chester's blood ran cold. You're bluffing. Those aren't real. David smiled sadly. Mrs. Patterson, would you please stand up? An elderly woman in a flower print dress stood shakily. Now walk toward the door, please. She took a few trembling steps. When she was about 20 feet from David, she suddenly gasped, clutching her chest. David pressed a button on his device, and she relaxed, breathing hard. A small demonstration, David said. Low voltage. The real activation will be much worse. Chester heard sirens approaching. David heard them too. They can surround the building, David said. It won't matter. These people are my insurance. Now, sit down, Officer Brennan. We need to talk. Chester sat at one of the tables. Around him, the hostages watched with terrified eyes. Some were crying quietly. Do you know why I chose elderly victims? David asked, pacing slowly. Because they're vulnerable? Because they're easy targets? No, it's because they're forgotten, just like my mother was forgotten after Timothy died. She withered away, and no one cared. No one checked on her. She died alone, and it was 3 days before anyone found her. David, I'm sorry about your mother. You don't get to be sorry. David's composure cracked. You get to go home every night. You get to live your life. My mother got to plan 2 funerals, first her son's, then her own. The room was deadly quiet except for the sound of sirens outside. But I learned something, David continued, calming himself. I learned that the system doesn't care about the elderly. Response times are slower. Investigations are less thorough. They're perfect victims because society has already written them off. Chester's phone rang. It was Chief Harrison. Chester, we have snipers in position. No, Chester said, looking at David. Any aggressive action, and he'll activate the devices. David nodded approvingly. You're learning. Now, here's what's going to happen. You're going to confess. Publicly. You're going to admit that you murdered my brother, that you acted recklessly, that you're responsible for my mother's death too. And if I do, then I'll disable the devices and turn myself in. Chester looked around at the terrified faces. Mrs. Patterson was still trembling from the demonstration. A man at the next table was clutching his wife's hand, both of them in their 80s. I need proof that you'll keep your word, Chester said. David reached into his pocket and pulled out a phone. He showed Chester the screen. It was a live stream setup, ready to broadcast. Confess, and this ends. Refuse, and... He gestured to the hostages. Chester's mind raced. He could see no way out that didn't risk innocent lives. But as he looked at David, he saw something in his eyes. Not just anger or grief, but exhaustion. This had taken everything from him. You're not a killer, David, Chester said softly. Not really. Margaret Thompson was an accident, wasn't she? You gave her too much medication. You didn't mean for her to die. David's hand trembled slightly. She was supposed to be scared, not dead. And these people? You don't want to hurt them. You just want someone to acknowledge your pain. I want justice. No, Chester said, standing slowly. You want your family back, and I can't give you that. No confession, no amount of suffering will bring them back. David's composure was crumbling. Tears ran down his face. You took everything from me. Your brother's death was a tragedy. I think about it every day. I review that moment over and over, wondering if I could have done something different. But I can't change it. Neither can you. Shut up. David, your mother wouldn't want this. Timothy wouldn't want this. Don't you dare speak their names! The device in David's hand was shaking now. Chester took a step closer. I'm going to tell you something I've never told anyone, Chester said. After your brother died, I went to his funeral. I stood in the back where no one could see me. I watched your mother cry. I wanted to apologize, to explain, but I couldn't. Because what could I say? That I was sorry? That I was just doing my job? None of it would have mattered. David was sobbing now, the device loose in his grip. I saw you there too, Chester continued. Supporting your mother, being strong for her. You were a good son, David. You still are. Don't dishonor their memory with more death. I just wanted someone to care, David whispered. When Mom died, no one came. No one from the department, no one from the city. It was just me at her funeral. Chester took another step closer. He was within arm's reach now. I'm sorry. We failed you. I failed you. But these people aren't responsible for that. David looked around at the hostages as if seeing them for the first time, really seeing them, not as victims or pawns, but as people. Scared, elderly people who just wanted to go home. I can't... David's voice broke. I can't stop. If I stop, then it was all for nothing. No, Chester said gently. If you stop, then you're still the good man your mother raised, the brother Timothy loved. David's hand opened. The device fell to the floor. Chester caught David as he collapsed, sobbing uncontrollably. The SWAT team burst in moments later, but Chester waved them back. He held David as he cried, this broken young man who had lost everything and had tried to fill the void with vengeance. The devices, David mumbled through his tears. They're not real. Just the demonstration one on Mrs. Patterson. The others are just lights and wires. I couldn't actually hurt them. Chester closed his eyes in relief. Around them, the hostages began to realize they were safe. Some cried, others hugged each other. Mrs. Patterson stood on shaky legs and walked over. Young man, she said to David, her voice gentle despite everything. I forgive you. David looked up at her, confused. Why? Because holding on to anger only hurts yourself. I learned that when my husband died. As the paramedics and police took David away, Chester stood in the empty hall. Agent Hendricks approached him. That was incredibly risky. He could have activated those devices. No, Chester said. He couldn't. He's not a killer. He's just a kid who lost his way in grief. Chester walked outside into the afternoon sun. The parking lot was still full of emergency vehicles, but the crisis was over. He thought about Timothy Carlson, about that night 3 years ago. He'd always wonder if he could have done something different. But now he had a new memory too, of Timothy's brother, broken but not beyond redemption. His phone buzzed. A message from Chief Harrison. David Carlson is cooperating fully. He's asking to speak with you when you're ready. Chester wasn't ready. Not yet. But he would be. Because sometimes the hardest part of the job wasn't facing danger. It was facing the consequences of your actions, even the justified ones. As he drove home that evening, Chester passed by Mildred's house. She was on her porch with Floyd, both of them having returned home despite everything. They waved at him, and he waved back. They were survivors, resilient in a way that David hadn't expected. The elderly weren't forgotten. They were some of the strongest people Chester knew. And in trying to use them for revenge, David had only proven that. 3 days had passed since the incident at the senior center. Chester sat in a small interview room at the county jail, waiting. The door opened and David Carlson was escorted in, wearing an orange jumpsuit that made him look even younger and more fragile than before. David sat down across from Chester, his hands cuffed in front of him. He looked better, less gaunt, more present. The manic energy that had driven him was gone, replaced by a hollow exhaustion. Thank you for coming, David said quietly. You asked to see me. I needed to tell you something. About that night, when Timothy died. Chester tensed but remained silent. I was there, David continued. Not at the scene, but nearby. I was supposed to pick him up from Mrs. Pearson's house. He'd been helping her with yard work. It was part of his therapy, having structured activities. But I was late. I'd been at a party, drinking. If I'd been on time. You can't blame yourself for that. David laughed bitterly. Can't I? You shot him. But I wasn't there when he needed me. Mrs. Pearson called the police because he was having a meltdown about me not showing up. He thought I'd abandoned him. Chester felt a weight settle in his chest. Another layer of tragedy in an already tragic story. The thing is, David continued, I spent so long hating you that I never dealt with hating myself. It was easier to make you the monster than to face my own guilt. David, I'm not saying you were right to shoot him. I'll never believe that. But I understand now that you didn't set out to kill him. You were just doing what you thought was right in the moment. They sat in silence for a moment before David spoke again. There's something else. Something I didn't tell the FBI. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. I wasn't working alone. Not exactly. Chester's blood ran cold. What do you mean? The technical stuff. The devices, the phone spoofing. I'm not that smart. Someone helped me. Someone who wanted to see you suffer as much as I did. Who? I don't know their real name. We met online, in a support group for people who'd lost family to police violence. They called themselves Justice. They provided the equipment, the training, said they'd been waiting for someone like me. Chester immediately thought of the sophistication of some of the devices, the knowledge of police procedures. David, this is important. How did you communicate with them? Encrypted messages, burner phones. They were careful, but... David hesitated. They said something once. Said this was bigger than just my revenge. That there were others like me in other cities, being helped to get justice. A network? David nodded. They called it the silent line, like the 911 calls. Voices that go unheard until it's too late. Chester stood up. I need to report this immediately. Wait, David said. There's more. They gave me a final message to deliver to you, if I got caught. They said, the game isn't over. It's just beginning. Chester left the jail and immediately called Agent Hendricks. Within hours, a multi-agency task force was assembled. The FBI's cyber crimes unit began analyzing David's devices, looking for any trace of this justice figure. That evening, Chester was at home, finally trying to get some sleep, when his phone rang. Unknown number. Officer Brennan. The voice was different from David's. Older, more refined. Or should I say the famous Officer Brennan? You've become quite the celebrity in certain circles. Justice, I presume. A soft laugh. David talked, did he? Poor boy. He was so eager for revenge, so easy to manipulate. All I had to do was give him the tools and point him in your direction. Why? What's your stake in this? My stake? Officer Brennan, you're not special. You're just one of many. Across this country, there are officers who've made fatal mistakes, who've hidden behind protocol and procedure while families grieve. David was a test case, and he performed beautifully. He's in custody. Your plan failed. Did it? Check the news, Officer Brennan. Chester grabbed his laptop and pulled up news sites. His heart sank. 3 similar incidents in 3 different states. Elderly victims, 911 hang-ups, officers being targeted for past shootings, all in the last 24 hours. You see? The voice continued. David was just the beginning. The silent line has many voices, and they're all about to speak at once. We'll stop you. How? You don't know who I am. You don't know where I am. And most importantly, you don't know who the next David Carlson will be. Could be anyone who's lost someone to police action. And there are so many to choose from. The line went dead. Chester immediately forwarded the information to the task force. The FBI escalated the threat level, warning departments nationwide. But the voice was right. How do you stop an enemy you can't identify? Who recruits from a pool of grieving, angry people looking for someone to blame? 2 weeks later, Chester was back on patrol. The department had insisted he take time off, but sitting at home only made things worse. He needed to be working, helping people, trying to make amends in whatever small way he could. He was driving through Oak Grove neighborhood when he got a familiar call. Unit 7, Welfare check requested at 1847 Sycamore Lane. Mildred Hutchinson hasn't been answering her phone. Chester's hands tightened on the steering wheel. It could be nothing. Mildred might have just gone out, forgotten to charge her phone. But after everything... Unit 7 responding. He pulled up to Mildred's house, noting that her car was in the driveway. The front door was closed, locked. Chester walked around to the back, remembering the last time he'd done this. The back door was open. Chester called for backup, then entered carefully. "Mrs. Hutchinson? It's Officer Brennan." He found her in the living room, sitting in her favorite chair, very much alive and apparently unharmed. But she was staring at something on her coffee table. It was a photo of Chester, just like before. But this time, there was no red X, no timer. Just words written on the back. "You can't protect them all." "Mrs. Hutchinson, are you okay?" She looked up at him with tired eyes. "He was here. Not the young man from before. Someone else. Older. He didn't hurt me, just wanted me to give you that." "Can you describe him?" "Middle-aged, graying hair, very polite. He said to tell you that David was sloppy, emotional, that the next ones won't be." Chester helped Mildred to her feet, ensuring she was truly unharmed. As backup arrived to process the scene, he stood on her porch looking out at the quiet neighborhood. The silent line was real. It was organized, and it was coming for officers across the country. David had been a beta test, a proof of concept. The real attacks would be more sophisticated, more targeted, more deadly. But there was something else. Something that gave Chester a glimmer of hope. They'd made a mistake coming back to Mildred. It was personal, emotional, exactly what they'd criticized David for being. Which meant justice, whoever they were, had a personal stake in this too. This wasn't just about creating a network of revenge. This was about someone's own loss, their own grief. And that made them vulnerable. Chester's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Timothy Carlson was my nephew. My sister died of grief. You took my family. Now I'll take everything from you, one call at a time." So Justice had a name, a face, a motive. They were Timothy and David's relative. That narrowed it down considerably. Chester immediately called Agent Hendricks with the information. Within hours, they'd identified the suspect. Robert Carlson, Timothy and David's uncle. A tech consultant who disappeared shortly after his sister's funeral. His background in telecommunications explained the phone spoofing. His grief explained the motive. But knowing who he was and finding him were two different things. Robert Carlson had gone completely off the grid, likely using the same encrypted channels he'd provided to David and the others. 3 months passed. The silent line attacks continued sporadically across the country. 5 more incidents, 12 more victims. Each time, the perpetrators were caught, but they were just grieving family members who'd been recruited and equipped by Robert. He remained a ghost. Chester had returned to regular duty, but he'd changed. He was more careful now, more patient. Every call could be a trap, but every call also represented someone in need. He couldn't let fear prevent him from doing his job. It was a quiet Tuesday night when the call came in. Another 911 hang-up, this time from an address Chester didn't recognize. 427 Industrial Way, an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town. "Unit 7, be advised, that address has been vacant for 2 years, dispatch warned. "Copy that. Proceeding with caution." Chester arrived at the warehouse with full backup. The building loomed dark against the night sky, its broken windows like dead eyes. They entered in formation, clearing rooms methodically. In the main warehouse floor, they found him. Robert Carlson, sitting at a makeshift desk surrounded by computer equipment and phones. He didn't run, didn't fight. He just looked up at Chester with eyes that held 3 years of grief and rage. "I knew you'd come," Robert said. "You always come when called. It's your weakness and your strength. Robert Carlson, You're under arrest." "I know." He stood slowly, hands visible. "But I want you to know something first. The silent line isn't mine anymore. I gave it to them. All those grieving families. They'll carry it forward with or without me. Every suspicious 911 call, every elderly victim, you'll wonder if it's them. That's my real revenge, Officer Brennan. Not death, but doubt. Every call you answer, you'll wonder if it's a trap. And sometimes it will be." As they led Robert away, Chester stood in the empty warehouse, surrounded by the equipment that had orchestrated so much pain. The silent line would continue. Robert was right about that. But Chester would continue too, answering calls, protecting people, facing whatever came. His radio crackled. "Unit 7, we have a welfare check needed at 88 Rosewood Lane. Elderly male, hasn't been seen in 2 days." Chester looked at his partner, Officer Mills, who'd been assigned to ride with him after the threats. She looked nervous. "Could be nothing," she said. Or it could be someone who needs help," Chester finished. He picked up his radio. "Unit 7 responding." As they drove toward Rosewood Lane, Chester thought about Mildred and Floyd, about all the elderly victims who'd been caught up in David and Robert's revenge. They were survivors, all of them. They'd faced their fears and continued living. So would he. The house at 88 Rosewood Lane was dark, quiet. Chester approached carefully, but without paranoia. He knocked, announced himself, and when no one answered, he and Mills entered through an unlocked back door. They found the elderly man in his bedroom, not tied up or threatened, but simply fallen. He'd broken his hip 2 days ago and hadn't been able to reach his phone. He was dehydrated, but alive. As paramedics loaded the man into an ambulance, he grabbed Chester's hand. "Thank you for coming. I was starting to think no one would." "We always come," Chester said. "That's what we do." Mills looked at him as they walked back to their cruiser. "Weren't you worried it was a trap?" "Every call could be a trap," Chester replied. "But most aren't. Most are just people who need help. The moment we stop responding because of fear is the moment they win." As they drove away, Chester's phone buzzed. A message from David Carlson, sent from prison. "I heard about my uncle. I'm sorry. For everything. I hope someday you can forgive me." Chester deleted the message without replying. Forgiveness would take time, maybe more time than he had. But he'd learned something through all of this. Grief and revenge were cycles that fed on themselves. The only way to break the cycle was to refuse to perpetuate it. The radio crackled again. Another call, another address, another person potentially in need. Chester reached for the radio without hesitation. "Unit 7 responding." The silent line might always be there, a shadow over every call, but Chester would answer anyway, because that's what he'd sworn to do, protect and serve, no matter the risk. As they drove through the dark streets of Millbrook, Chester thought about Timothy Carlson, about David, about Robert. 3 lives destroyed by one moment, one decision. He couldn't change the past, but he could affect the future. Every call answered carefully, every situation assessed properly, every life valued. The radio continued to chatter with the routine calls of a small-town police force. Somewhere out there, the silent line waited. But tonight, Chester thought, tonight it would stay silent. He was wrong. 3 states away, another grieving family member picked up a phone, dialed 911, and hung up. The game, as Robert had promised, was far from over. Officer Clarence Mitchell had been with the Cedar Falls Police Department in Iowa for 15 years, and wellness checks were routine. Most turned out to be nothing. Elderly relatives who'd forgotten to charge their phones, neighbors who'd gone on unexpected trips. But the call that came in on a cold November morning would change his understanding of routine forever. Unit 4, we have a wellness check request at 1426 Birchwood Drive, dispatch announced. Caller is Vivian Marsh, concerned about her neighbor Elmer Dawson, 91 years old. She hasn't seen him in 5 days, and his newspapers are piling up. Clarence acknowledged the call and headed toward Birchwood Drive, a quiet street lined with post-war bungalows. The neighborhood was mostly elderly residents who'd lived there for decades, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone and looked out for each other. He pulled up to 1426, noting the 5 newspapers scattered on the front lawn, still in their plastic wrapping. The house was a small, well-maintained ranch with brown siding and a neat garden that was starting to show signs of neglect. The blinds were drawn on all visible windows. Vivian Marsh was waiting on the sidewalk, a woman in her 70s wearing a heavy coat and a worried expression. She hurried over as Clarence stepped out of his cruiser. "Officer, thank God you're here. Elmer never lets his papers pile up like this. He's very particular about his routine." "When did you last see Mr. Dawson, ma'am?" 5 days ago, Monday morning. He was getting his mail. We waved but didn't talk. That's not unusual. Elmer keeps to himself mostly, but he always brings in his paper first thing, and his car hasn't moved." She pointed to an old sedan in the driveway, covered in fallen leaves. Clarence approached the front door and knocked firmly. "Mr. Dawson, Cedar Falls Police. We're doing a wellness check." No response. He knocked again, louder. "Mr. Dawson, if you can hear me, please come to the door or make some noise." Still nothing. Clarence tried the doorknob, locked. He walked around the house, Vivian following at a distance. The back door was also locked, but a window near the back porch was open about 2 inches. Through the gap, Clarence could smell something unpleasant. Not death, he'd know that smell, but something stale and sour. "I'm going to enter through this window to check on Mr. Dawson," Clarence told Vivian. "Please wait out front." He pushed the window up and climbed through into what appeared to be a laundry room. The smell was stronger inside. Unwashed clothes, spoiled food, and something else. Something medicinal. "Mr. Dawson?" "Police. I'm in your home to check on your welfare." The laundry room led to a narrow hallway. Family photos lined the walls. A younger Elmer with a woman who must have been his wife, children, grandchildren, all smiling, all from years past. The photos grew fewer and more recent as Clarence moved down the hall, the last one showing Elmer alone at what looked like his 90th birthday party. The kitchen was a disaster. Dishes molded in the sink, food rotted on the counter. A calendar on the wall was still turned to October, though it was now mid-November. Red X's marked off days until October 28th, then nothing. Clarence continued through the house, his unease growing. The living room was tidy but dusty, as if it hadn't been used in weeks. A recliner faced a small television, a TV tray beside it holding an empty coffee mug, and a half-finished crossword puzzle dated October 27th. He heard something then, a soft sound from somewhere deeper in the house. Almost like breathing, but not quite. "Mr. Dawson?" Clarence followed the sound down another hallway toward the bedrooms. The first door was open, a guest room that looked like it hadn't been used in years. The second was a bathroom, empty but reeking of unflushed waste. The sound was coming from behind the third door, which was closed. Clarence knocked. "Mr. Dawson, I'm coming in." He opened the door and immediately wished he hadn't. Elmer Dawson was sitting in a chair facing the window, his back to the door. He was alive. Clarence could see the slight rise and fall of his shoulders, but something was terribly wrong. The elderly man was completely still except for that breathing, and he was wearing what looked like a hospital gown. "Mr. Dawson?" Clarence moved around to face him and had to suppress a gasp. Elmer's eyes were open but unfocused, staring at nothing. His face was gaunt, cheeks hollow, lips cracked and dry. An IV line ran from his arm to a bag hanging on a makeshift stand beside the chair. The bag was nearly empty. "Mr. Dawson, can you hear me?" Elmer's eyes slowly, so slowly, shifted to look at Clarence. There was awareness there, but also fear. Terrible, paralyzing fear. "Ma," Elmer managed, his voice barely a whisper. "Ma. It's okay, sir. I'm going to get you help." Clarence reached for his radio. "Dispatch, I need paramedics at 1426 Birchwood immediately. Elderly male appears to be in medical distress." As he spoke, he noticed more details. Restraint marks on Elmer's wrists, though he wasn't currently tied. Multiple IV insertion points on both arms, some infected. A bedpan under the chair that hadn't been emptied in days. Making... Elmer struggled to speak, his eyes darting toward the door. "Who did this to you?" Clarence asked, kneeling beside the old man. "Making... me... better," Elmer finally managed. "She's... making me... better. Who is?" Before Elmer could answer, Clarence heard the front door open. Footsteps in the hallway, quick and purposeful. "Dad, I'm home." A woman appeared in the doorway, mid-50s, graying hair pulled back in a bun, wearing scrubs. She stopped short when she saw Clarence, but her expression wasn't surprise. It was calm calculation. "Officer," she said pleasantly. "I didn't hear you come in." "Ma'am, I'm Officer Mitchell. I'm responding to a wellness check. Are you Mr. Dawson's daughter?" "Daughter-in-law, Helen Dawson. My husband passed 3 years ago." She moved into the room, going straight to Elmer. "How are you feeling today, Dad?" Elmer's eyes filled with tears, but he said nothing. "What's wrong with him?" Clarence asked. "Advanced dementia," Helen said smoothly, checking the IV bag. "I'm a registered nurse. I've been caring for him at home. It's what he wanted. No nursing homes." "This doesn't look like standard home care." Helen's smile tightened. "Officer, have you ever cared for someone with dementia? It's not pretty. They forget to eat, to drink, to take their medications. The IV is for hydration and nutrition. The restraints," she gestured to Elmer's wrists, "are only used when he becomes violent, which happens more often now. I need to see some documentation, medical records, prescriptions." "Of course." Helen moved to a dresser and pulled out a thick folder. "Everything's here. Doctor's notes, medication lists, power of attorney documents." Clarence looked through the papers. They seemed legitimate, but something felt wrong. Elmer's eyes were too aware for advanced dementia, and the fear in them. "Mr. Dawson," Clarence addressed Elmer directly, "are you being cared for properly? Blink once for yes, twice for no." Elmer's eyes darted to Helen, then back to Clarence. He blinked twice, quickly. "Dad gets confused," Helen said, her voice still pleasant, but with an edge now. "He often doesn't recognize me, thinks I'm an intruder." The paramedics arrived then, filling the small room. As they began examining Elmer, Clarence pulled one aside. "Check him thoroughly. Something's not right here." The paramedic, a young man named Tommy, nodded and began his assessment. Within minutes, his expression grew concerned. "This man is severely malnourished and dehydrated," Tommy announced. "The IV isn't hydration. It's some kind of sedative. We need to get him to the hospital immediately." Helen's calm facade cracked. "You can't take him. I have power of attorney. He's under my care." "Ma'am, this man needs immediate medical attention," Tommy said firmly. "This is beyond home care." As they prepared to move Elmer, he grabbed Clarence's hand with surprising strength. "Photos," he whispered. "Look, photos." Helen tried to intervene, but Clarence blocked her. "Ma'am, I need you to step back." "You don't understand," Helen said, her voice rising. "He needs his medications. Without them, he becomes difficult." They loaded Elmer onto a gurney. As they wheeled him out, he kept trying to speak, but the words wouldn't come properly. The sedatives, whatever they were, had affected his ability to communicate. Clarence stayed behind with Helen, who had gone very still. "I'm going to need you to come to the station for questioning," he said. "Am I under arrest?" "Not at this time, but I have concerns about Mr. Dawson's care." Helen nodded slowly. "I need to get some things. His medications, his papers." She moved toward the dresser again, but this time Clarence saw her palm something small. Before he could react, she'd swallowed it. "What did you just take?" Helen smiled, a strange, serene expression. "Just my anxiety medication. This is all very stressful." Within minutes, Helen began to sway. Her pupils dilated. Her breathing became shallow. "What did you take?" Clarence demanded, catching her as she started to fall. "Same thing. I gave him," she mumbled. "Just more." Clarence called for another ambulance, but Helen was unconscious before it arrived. The paramedics found an empty pill bottle in her pocket. A powerful veterinary sedative, enough to kill if taken in large doses. While waiting for backup to secure the scene, Clarence remembered Elmer's words about photos. He began searching the house more carefully. In a closet in the guest room, he found them. Dozens of photographs, but not family photos. These were medical photos, documenting Elmer's deterioration over time. Dating back months, they showed him getting progressively thinner, weaker, more disoriented. But the most disturbing discovery was a journal, hidden under the mattress in Helen's room. The entries were dated, methodical, clinical. October 1st, increased dosage. Subject showing more compliance. October 5th, nutritional intake reduced to test resilience. October 12th, vocal resistance decreasing. Sedation protocol successful. October 20th, subject attempted escape. Restraints now necessary. October 28th, perfect compliance achieved. Subject fully dependent. The entries continued, describing in cold detail how Helen had systematically broken Elmer down, using her medical knowledge to keep him weak but alive, dependent but aware. The final entry, dated that morning. Neighbor becoming suspicious. May need to relocate subject. Clarence felt sick. This wasn't neglect or misguided care. This was systematic torture, disguised as caregiving. His phone rang. It was the hospital. "Officer Mitchell, this is Dr. Brown at Cedar Falls General. Mr. Dawson is stable and recovering. He's able to communicate better now that the sedatives are wearing off. He's asking for you." "I'll be right there." At the hospital, Clarence found Elmer propped up in bed, looking frail but alert. His eyes were clear now, though still haunted. "Thank you," Elmer said, his voice rough but understandable. I thought I would die there." "Mr. Dawson, can you tell me what happened?" Elmer's hands trembled as he spoke. "Helen came to live with me after my son died. Cancer. She said she had nowhere else to go, and I felt sorry for her. At first, she was helpful, cooking, cleaning. Then she started giving me pills, said they were vitamins." He paused, sipping water through a straw. "The pills made me dizzy, confused. She told me I was developing dementia, that I needed more help, more pills. Soon I couldn't think straight, couldn't walk without falling. She got power of attorney while I was drugged." "Why didn't you call for help?" "She took my phone, disconnected the landline. When I tried to leave, she'd increase the drugs until I couldn't move. She'd decrease them just enough to keep me aware of what was happening, then tell me no one would believe a senile old man over a registered nurse with all the right paperwork." "The neighbors never suspected?" Elmer shook his head. "Helen would clean me up and walk me to the window every few days so people could see me. She'd wave my hand for me, then back to the chair." "But why? What did she want?" "Control," Elmer said simply. "She told me once, when I asked. Said her whole life people had controlled her. Her parents, her husband. her employers. Now it was her turn. And who better to control than a helpless old man with no family to check on him? Clarence thought about the journal entries, the methodical nature of the abuse. "Mr. Dawson, I need to ask, are there others? Did she mention anyone else?" Elmer's eyes widened. She sometimes talked on the phone to someone named Vivian, talked about her other projects. I thought she meant work, but Clarence's blood ran cold. Vivian, the neighbor who'd called in the wellness check. He called dispatch immediately. "I need units at Vivian Marsh's residence, 1422 Birchwood Drive, possible victim of elder abuse." But even as he made the call, Clarence had a sinking feeling they were too late. Helen had swallowed those pills for a reason. She knew her game was over. But how many other games had she been playing? The response to Vivian Marsh's house was swift. 3 units converged on 1422 Birchwood Drive while Clarence raced from the hospital. The house was a mirror image of Elmer's. Same post-war construction, same neat lawn, same drawn blinds. But this time, the front door stood wide open. Officer Janet Ross was first on scene. She approached carefully, weapon drawn. "Mrs. Marsh, Cedar Falls Police." No response. Ross entered, followed by 2 other officers. The house was immaculate, nothing like the deterioration they'd found at Elmer's. Everything was clean, organized, almost sterile. The only unusual thing was the smell. A strong antiseptic scent, like a hospital. They found Vivian Marsh in the basement. She was alive, sitting in what looked like a modified dentist's chair, surrounded by medical equipment. IV lines, monitors, restraints, but all professionally arranged, nothing makeshift about it. And she wasn't alone. 3 other elderly people were down there, each in their own chair, all connected to IVs, all conscious but unable to move. Their eyes tracked the officer's movements, full of desperate hope. "Get medical here now!" Ross shouted into her radio. Clarence arrived as the paramedics were bringing up the first victim. Vivian Marsh was conscious but weak, trying to speak through cracked lips. "Officer Mitchell?" she managed. "Mrs. Marsh, you called about Elmer, but you're—" "Had to," she whispered. "She was distracted with him. Gave me a chance. Managed to get to phone when she was at his house. Could only make one call. Chose to save him." "How long have you been down there?" 2 months, maybe 3. Hard to tell." Tears rolled down her weathered cheeks. "The others, been here longer." The basement was a nightmare made clinical. Each elderly victim had a chart hanging on their chair, documenting medications, vital signs, feeding schedules. Everything meticulously recorded like they were lab experiments. Clarence found a desk in the corner with more journals, more photos. But these weren't just Helen's work. Different handwriting, different dates, some going back years. A photograph caught his eye. Helen with 2 other women, all in nursing scrubs, all smiling at what looked like a medical conference. Ross came up from the basement. 4 victims total, all alive but in various states of malnourishment and sedation. The paramedics are saying it's a miracle they survived. "It wasn't meant to kill them," Clarence said, reading from one of the journals. "It was about sustaining them in a state of complete dependence. Listen to this. Subject must remain aware enough to comprehend their helplessness, but sedated enough to prevent resistance. The balance is delicate but achievable with proper pharmaceutical management." Jesus Christ, who writes something like that? Clarence showed her the photo. Helen wasn't working alone. There are others. His phone rang. It was the hospital. "Officer Mitchell? Helen Dawson is conscious and asking for you. She says she'll only talk to you." Clarence found Helen handcuffed to her hospital bed, 2 officers standing guard. She looked pale but alert, her eyes sharp and calculating. "Officer Mitchell," she said calmly, How's my father-in-law? He's recovering, as are the 4 people you held in Vivian Marsh's basement. Helen tilted her head. 4? There should be 5. Clarence's blood ran cold. Where's the 5th? That depends. What time is it? Answer the question. Helen smiled. It's a time-sensitive situation. You see, my colleague was supposed to check on our 5th subject at noon. If she finds the police have been to Vivian's house, well, protocols exist for such situations. What protocols? Cleanup protocols. Can't leave evidence of the full operation. Clarence grabbed his phone, calling dispatch. I need all available units searching the Birchwood Drive area. We have a potential victim in immediate danger. Helen watched him with amusement. You won't find them by driving around. The network is smarter than that. The network? Did you think I was alone in this? There are dozens of us. Nurses, caregivers, home health aides. We find the vulnerable ones, the isolated, the forgotten, the ones whose families never visit, whose friends have all died. We give them the care they deserve. You tortured them. We controlled them. There's a difference. Helen's expression grew serious. Do you know what it's like to be a caregiver, officer? To spend your entire life tending to others' needs? Always gentle, always patient, always subordinate to doctors, to families, to the patients themselves. Some of us decided we deserved to be in charge for once. Where is the 5th victim? Helen leaned back. Her name is Dorothy, 93 years old, lives alone on Maple Street, number 302, but you're already too late. My colleague is very punctual. Clarence ran from the room, calling units to 302 Maple Street. They arrived in minutes, but the house was empty. No victim, no perpetrator, just an empty hospital bed in the living room and the lingering smell of bleach. On the kitchen table was a note. The game has changed. E. E? Ross asked, reading over his shoulder. Another one of them, Helen's colleague. They searched the house but found little evidence. Whoever E was, she'd cleaned thoroughly. The only thing left was a single photograph tucked behind the refrigerator, the same conference photo Clarence had found earlier, but with a different woman circled. Back at the station, Clarence spread out everything they'd collected. 5 confirmed victims, 1 missing, and at least 2 perpetrators, with Helen claiming there were dozens more. The FBI was being called in, but Clarence couldn't shake the feeling they were missing something. He interviewed the recovered victims one by one. Their stories were horrifyingly similar. Each had been approached by a friendly healthcare worker offering free in-home services. Each had been gradually sedated and isolated. Each had been kept in a state of conscious helplessness for months. But it was the 4th victim, Harold Patterson, who provided the crucial detail. She talked to someone on the phone every night, Harold said, his voice still weak. Always at 9 p.m. Called them Control, like it was some kind of code name. What did she say to Control? Status reports, subject conditions. She'd read from our charts, and sometimes... Harold paused, struggling with the memory. Sometimes Control would give new instructions. Increase this medication, decrease that one, like we were experiments. Clarence felt the scope of this expanding beyond anything he'd imagined. This wasn't just a few rogue caregivers. This was organized, hierarchical, systematic. That evening, as Clarence was preparing to hand the case over to the FBI, his phone rang. Unknown number. Officer Mitchell? The voice was female, calm, professional. I believe you've been looking for me. Who is this? Helen calls me E, but that's not important. What's important is Dorothy. Where is she? Safe, for now. I'm not like Helen, officer. She got emotional, sloppy, made it personal. I'm simply practical. Then let Dorothy go. I will, under one condition. Helen talks only to you. No FBI, no other agencies. Just you. She tells you everything, and I'll release Dorothy unharmed. Why would you trust me? Because you're the only one who's shown genuine concern for the victims. The others see a case. You see people. Helen recognized that. It's why she chose you. Chose me? To end this. She's tired, officer. We all are. But the organization won't let us just walk away. Unless we're caught. Unless we're stopped. Do you understand? Clarence thought he did. You want out. Some of us do. Others enjoy it too much. They won't stop unless forced. Helen knows who they are, where they are. But she'll only tell you. How do I know Dorothy is still alive? There was a pause, then a weak voice came on the line. Officer, this is Dorothy. I'm okay. Scared, but okay. E came back on. You have 24 hours. Helen talks, tells you everything, or Dorothy disappears forever. And officer, don't try to trace this. Dorothy's life depends on you playing by the rules. The line went dead. Clarence stood in his empty office, weighing his options. The FBI would arrive in the morning. Protocol demanded he report this contact immediately. But Dorothy's life hung in the balance. He made his decision. That night, Clarence sat alone with Helen in a secure hospital room. The guards were outside, the recording equipment turned off at Helen's insistence. E called you, Helen said. It wasn't a question. She has Dorothy. Of course she does. E is nothing if not thorough. Helen shifted in her bed. Do you know why we chose elderly victims, officer? Because they're vulnerable. No, because they're invisible. Society discards them, warehouses them in nursing homes, forgets they exist. We gave them attention. Twisted attention, yes, but more than they'd gotten in years. That doesn't justify what you did. I'm not trying to justify it. I'm explaining it. There are 43 of us in the network, spread across 6 states. We share techniques, trade subjects sometimes, cover for each other. It started as a support group for burned-out caregivers. Then someone suggested we deserved more, that we'd earned the right to be in control. Who started it? Her name is Margaret Stern. She's been doing this for 15 years. She wrote the protocols, established the hierarchy. She calls herself the director. Clarence took notes as Helen continued, naming names, providing addresses, explaining the structure of their network. It was more extensive than anyone could have imagined. Why are you telling me this? He asked finally. Because I'm dying, Helen said simply. The pills I took caused permanent damage. I have maybe a week, and I'm tired of it all. The constant vigilance, the fear of being caught, the weight of what we've done. At first it felt like power. Then it just felt like another prison. And E? Ellen Morrison. She's been in the network for 3 years. She wants out, but knows Margaret will never let her leave. None of us can leave. We know too much. So this is your exit strategy? Get caught? Bring down the network? Helen nodded. E will release Dorothy once she knows I've talked. She'll disappear. Try to start over. Some of the others might too. But Margaret and her core group, they'll fight. They believe what they're doing is right. That they're teaching the elderly a lesson about dependence, about who really has power. They're torturing innocent people. Yes, Helen agreed. We are. We did. And I'll face judgment for it. But first, help me stop the others. Clarence spent the next 6 hours taking Helen's confession, filling notebook after notebook with details about the network. By dawn, he had enough to dismantle the entire operation. True to her word, E released Dorothy. The elderly woman was found at a rest stop, physically unharmed but deeply traumatized. E herself vanished, though her real name and photo were circulated to law enforcement nationwide. The FBI raids began at sunrise. 43 locations across 6 states, all hit simultaneously. Most of the caregivers were caught completely off guard. They found 17 more victims, all alive but in various states of abuse. Margaret Stern was arrested at her home in Chicago, where they found a basement converted into a medical facility with 4 elderly victims. She showed no remorse, insisting she'd done nothing wrong. "They needed care," she said during her interrogation. "I provided it. If they couldn't appreciate it, that was their failing, not mine." The trials would take years. The trauma to the victims would last lifetimes. But the network was broken. Clarence visited Elmer one last time before the case was handed fully to federal authorities. The old man was in a rehabilitation facility, slowly regaining his strength. "Thank you," Elmer said, gripping Clarence's hand. "You saved my life." "You saved yourself," Clarence replied. "You found the strength to signal for help." "Will they all be caught? The ones who did this?" "Most of them. Helen gave us everything we needed." Elmer was quiet for a moment. "She told me once that she envied me, said I got to be helpless to have someone else make all the decisions. She said that was freedom. She was wrong. I know, but officer, I think she was broken long before she broke me. That doesn't excuse it, but I pity her." As Clarence left the facility, he thought about Helen's words about caregivers, about the invisible burden they carried. It didn't justify what she'd done, nothing could. But it highlighted a failure in the system, a gap where the vulnerable on both sides could fall through. The wellness check that had started as routine had uncovered a nationwide horror. But it had also shown the importance of checking on the forgotten, the isolated, the invisible. Because sometimes a simple knock on the door could be the difference between life and a living death. 2 weeks after the raids, Clarence thought the case was closed. The FBI had taken over, arrests had been made, and victims were recovering. He'd returned to regular patrol duty, trying to forget the horrors he'd uncovered. But evil rarely stays buried. The call came at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. Clarence was home, sound asleep, when his phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello?" Breathing. Slow, deliberate breathing. "Who is this?" "You missed one." The voice was elderly, female, trembling. "She's here. In my house. Please." The line went dead. Clarence sat up, fully awake. He called dispatch to trace the call, but it had come from a burner phone. No location, no caller ID. He was about to dismiss it as a prank when his phone buzzed with a text. A photo of an elderly woman tied to a wheelchair, a piece of paper held in front of her with today's date, and a message. "You missed one. M." Margaret Stern was in custody. This was someone else. Clarence called the FBI agent handling the case, Jennifer Park. "We have a problem." Within an hour, a task force was assembled. The photo was analyzed, but it had been scrubbed of metadata. The background showed only a generic living room, floral wallpaper, dated furniture, could be any of 1,000 homes in Iowa. "Helen's list had 43 names," Agent Park said. "We arrested 41. E escaped, and now this M. But Helen said that was everyone. Helen lied, or didn't know about M." They reviewed Helen's confession videos, looking for any mention of an M. Nothing. But then Clarence remembered something Harold Patterson had said about the phone calls to Control. "What if M is Control?" he suggested. "What if there was someone above Margaret Stern?" It seemed impossible, but they had to consider it. They arranged to interview Margaret, but she laughed when they mentioned M. "M? Oh, you poor fools. You really thought Helen knew everything? She was middle management at best." "Who is M?" Margaret smiled coldly. "The one who taught me everything. The original. The first one to realize what we could do with our skills, our access. But you'll never find her. She's a ghost. She has a hostage." Then that hostage is already dead. M doesn't take prisoners. She takes subjects, and her experiments are far more advanced than ours ever were. Clarence felt a chill. Experiments? We were playing at control. M studies it, documents it. She's been doing this for 30 years, officer. Long before the network, long before any of us. We were her students, and you've expelled the class. Now she has to teach the lesson herself. They pressed Margaret for more information, but she claimed not to know M's real name or location. She contacted us, never the other way around. Always different phones, different email addresses. Like I said, a ghost. That afternoon, another photo arrived. The same elderly woman, but now she was hooked up to multiple IVs, surrounded by medical equipment far more sophisticated than anything they'd found in the network's locations. A new message. Helen talked too much. This one won't. Clarence studied the photo desperately for clues. Something about the wallpaper pattern seemed familiar. He'd seen it before, but where? Then it hit him. The rehabilitation facility where Elmer was staying. He'd noticed the same pattern in one of the unused wings. She's at Sunrise Manor, he told Park. The old wing that's been closed for renovation. They mobilized immediately, surrounding the facility. The main building was evacuated quietly while SWAT prepared to enter the closed wing. Clarence insisted on going in with them. The old wing was supposedly empty, but they found signs of recent activity. Fresh footprints in the dust, medical equipment that shouldn't be there, and the sound of machines humming behind a locked door at the end of the corridor. They breached the door and found a fully equipped medical facility hidden within the renovation area. The elderly woman from the photo was there, unconscious but alive, connected to a complex array of monitors and IVs. But M was nowhere to be found. A tablet on a nearby table displayed a video message. Clarence pressed play. An elderly woman appeared on screen, perhaps in her 70s, with steel gray hair and cold blue eyes. She wore a pristine lab coat. "Officer Mitchell," she began. "By the time you see this, I'll be gone. The subject you found is Mrs. Beverly Coleman. She'll recover fully. I'm not a monster. I'm a scientist." The video continued. "For 3 decades, I've studied the dynamics of care and control. The network you dismantled was just one experiment among many. Helen and the others thought they were revolutionaries, but they were just data points in my research." "What research?" Park muttered. As if anticipating the question, M continued. "You're wondering what kind of research requires such methods. It's simple. I study the breaking point of human dependence. At what point does a person stop fighting? At what point do they accept complete helplessness? The elderly make perfect subjects because society has already begun the process of making them dependent." The video showed charts, graphs, data collected over years. It was monstrous in its clinical detachment. "But my research is complete now," M said. "The network's exposure has provided the final data set, how the subjects recover, how the perpetrators justify their actions, how society responds. Fascinating material." The video shifted to show M in what looked like an airport. "I'm leaving the country now. Don't bother looking for me. Dr. Marion Whitfield died 15 years ago. Check the records. The woman you're looking for doesn't exist." The screen went dark. They saved Beverly Coleman, who indeed recovered fully, but she could tell them little about her captor. She'd been taken from her home 3 days earlier, kept sedated most of the time. She remembered only the cold eyes and clinical voice. Clarence couldn't let it go. He dug into the name Marion Whitfield. She had been a respected gerontologist who'd supposedly died in a car accident 15 years ago. But the body had been badly burned, identified only by dental records. Records that, upon review, seemed suspicious. He found a connection. Marion Whitfield had worked at Cedar Falls General Hospital 30 years ago. Her research had focused on patient autonomy and medical ethics. She'd been disciplined several times for unauthorized experiments on elderly patients. Nothing harmful, supposedly, just psychological studies. Then she'd disappeared for a year before the car accident. She faked her death, Clarence told Park. Started over with a new identity, continued her research underground. But who is she now? They had no answer. M had vanished as completely as if she'd never existed. 3 days later, Clarence received a package at his home. Inside was a leather journal filled with handwritten notes. Marion Whitfield's original research from 30 years ago. The early entries were academic, discussing theories of dependence and autonomy, but they gradually became darker, documenting unauthorized experiments, elderly patients manipulated into states of learned helplessness. The final entry was dated the day before her supposed death. The hospital board has suspended me, but they don't understand. This research is vital. The elderly are society's future. We're all heading toward dependence. Someone needs to understand how it works, how to control it. If I can't continue openly, I'll continue in shadow. A note was clipped to the journal. You deserve to understand, Officer Mitchell. The network was never about sadism or revenge. It was about science, about understanding power at its most fundamental level. Who has it, who loses it, and why we accept the transition. Your disruption of my experiment is unfortunate but not catastrophic. I have what I need. Enjoy your victory. M. Clarence shared the journal with the FBI, but M remained a ghost. Marion Whitfield, or whoever she was now, had prepared for this possibility for years. False identities, hidden resources, escape routes planned decades in advance. The network trials proceeded without her. 41 caregivers were convicted, receiving sentences ranging from 10 years to life. Helen died before her trial, her body giving out from the damage she'd inflicted on herself. He was never found, despite nationwide searches. But it was M who haunted Clarence. The idea that someone could conduct such experiments for 30 years, treating human suffering as data points, and simply disappear when discovered. 6 months later, Interpol contacted them. An elderly woman in Switzerland had reported a suspicious caregiver who matched M's description. By the time authorities arrived, the caregiver was gone, but they found evidence of the same kind of experiments. Charts, graphs, elderly subjects kept in states of controlled dependence. A year later, similar reports came from Japan, then Australia. Always the same pattern: elderly victims, sophisticated medical control, clinical documentation, and always the perpetrator vanished before capture. Clarence realized the truth. M hadn't stopped. She'd simply moved her laboratory. The entire world was her experiment now, and she was still collecting data. He kept a photo of Marion Whitfield on his desk, a reminder that some evil was too intelligent, too prepared to catch, but also a reminder to stay vigilant, because M was still out there, still experimenting, still reducing human beings to data points in her twisted research. The wellness check that had started with Elmer had uncovered a network of horror. But worse, it had revealed that the network itself was just part of someone else's grand experiment, and that experimenter was still free, still working, still watching. Sometimes, late at night, Clarence wondered if M was observing him too. If his investigation, his successes and failures were just more data points in her research. The thought kept him awake, wondering if anyone was ever truly free from being someone else's subject. But he continued his work, checking on the vulnerable, protecting the forgotten. Because even if M was out there, turning suffering into science, someone had to stand against it. Someone had to remember that behind every data point was a human being who deserved dignity, autonomy, and freedom. The wellness check had become a war, and Clarence knew it was far from over. 5 years had passed since the network's collapse. Clarence had been promoted to detective, specializing in elder abuse cases. The The Marion Whitfield case remained officially open but practically cold. M had become a ghost story told at law enforcement conferences, the one who got away. Clarence had almost made peace with it when Vivian Marsh called him. "Detective Mitchell, I need to see you. It's about her." Vivian had recovered physically from her ordeal, but never fully mentally. She lived in an assisted living facility now, too traumatized to be alone. Clarence found her in the common room, hands trembling as she held a newspaper. "Look," she said, pointing to an obituary. "Dr. Sarah Henderson, pioneering geriatric researcher, dies at 78. Clarence read it. A distinguished career, numerous publications on elder care, founded 3 nursing homes. Nothing suspicious. "I don't understand, Mrs. Marsh." "The photo," Vivian whispered. "Look at her eyes." Clarence studied the black and white photo. An elderly woman with kind features, smiling at the camera. But the eyes, cold, calculating, familiar. "You think this is M?" "I know it is. Those eyes watched me for 2 months in that basement. She visited sometimes, observed Helen's work. I'll never forget those eyes." Clarence took the newspaper. Dr. Sarah Henderson had died 3 days ago in a nursing home in Maine. Natural causes. He made some calls, learned she'd been living there for 2 years as a resident, not staff. A model patient, beloved by everyone. "I'm going to Maine," he told Vivian. "Be careful," she said. "Even dead, she's dangerous." The Coastal Manor nursing home in Portland, Maine was a high-end facility overlooking the ocean. The director, Dr. James Powell, was happy to talk about their recently deceased resident. "Sarah was remarkable," he said. "Even with her advancing dementia, she retained such dignity." "Dementia?" "Oh yes, quite advanced. She'd been declining for 2 years. Toward the end, she didn't recognize anyone, couldn't speak coherently, but she never lost her sweetness." Clarence asked to see her room. It had been cleaned out, but something felt wrong. Too clean, too empty, as if someone had sanitized it beyond normal procedure. "Did Dr. Henderson have any visitors?" "Just one regular, her niece, Ellen. Lovely woman, very devoted. She was with Sarah when she passed." "Ellen, E. Is the niece still in town?" "I believe she's handling the estate. She's staying at Sarah's house on Elm Street." Clarence drove to the address, calling for backup on the way. The house was a modest Victorian, well-maintained but unremarkable. The front door was open. Inside, he found Ellen Morrison, E from the network, packing boxes. She didn't run when she saw him. Instead, she smiled sadly. "Detective Mitchell, I wondered when you'd come. You've been here the whole time? With her?" Ellen nodded. "She contacted me after I escaped, offered me a deal, care for her in her final years, and she'd teach me everything she knew." "She was Marion Whitfield?" "Among other names. But yes." Ellen sat down heavily. "She was dying. Really dying this time. Pancreatic cancer. She needed someone who understood her work to be with her at the end." "Her work? You mean torturing the elderly?" "No," Ellen said firmly. "That's what we did. The network. We tortured. Marion studied. There's a difference, even if the methods looked the same." She led Clarence to the basement. Unlike the horror chambers they'd found before, this was a pristine laboratory. Filing cabinets lined the walls, each containing decades of research. 35 years of data, Ellen said. Every experiment, every subject, every observation. She documented everything. This is evidence of hundreds of crimes. Yes, but also genuine research. Twisted, unethical research, but research nonetheless. She understood dependency and autonomy in ways no one else did. How to create it, how to break it, how to reverse it. Clarence began looking through the files. Each one represented a person reduced to a test subject, but the data was disturbingly comprehensive. Psychological profiles, medical histories, detailed notes on mental breaking points. "Why didn't you call the police?" Ellen laughed bitterly. "With what phone? She monitored everything. Besides, she was dying. I thought justice would find her naturally." "But you stayed with her." "She needed care. Real care, not what we did to our victims. And I..." Ellen paused. "I needed to understand why I did it. Why any of us did it." She had theories about caregivers, about how we break too. She said the network was as much an experiment on us as on the elderly. "You were her subjects too?" "Every one of us." She recruited specific personalities, people already on the edge of burnout. She gave us permission to cross lines we were already approaching. Then she watched us deteriorate morally, documented our justifications, our gradual acceptance of evil. Clarence found a file labeled Network Analysis. Inside were profiles of every network member, including psychological assessments done without their knowledge. Helen's file was thick, documenting her progression from stressed caregiver to systematic abuser. "She played you all." "Brilliantly," Ellen agreed. "We thought we were predators. We were prey." In the back of the basement, Clarence found something else. A medical setup, but not for abuse. IV stands, monitors, a hospital bed. "Her final experiment," Ellen explained. She studied her own decline, documented her loss of autonomy as the cancer progressed. She said it was the culmination of her life's work, experiencing dependency from the inside. "And you helped her?" "I maintained her equipment, recorded her observations when she couldn't write anymore. Even at the end, when the dementia was real, she'd have moments of clarity where she'd describe what it felt like to lose control." Clarence felt sick. She experimented on herself? It was the only ethical experiment she ever conducted, fully consensual, fully informed. She joked once that it was her penance. Among the files, Clarence found videos. Marion, in her final months, describing her mental state as cancer and dementia claimed her mind. It was horrifying and fascinating in equal measure. "She left instructions," Ellen said. "All of this goes to you. The files, the research, everything. She said you'd understand its value, even if you hated its origin. I don't want it. Neither do I. But destroying it feels wrong too. Thousands suffered for this data. Maybe something good can come from it. Ethical researchers could learn from it without repeating her methods." Clarence called for a full forensics team. The basement contained evidence of crimes spanning decades and states. But Ellen was right. It also contained insights into human psychology that couldn't be obtained ethically. As they processed the scene, Ellen handed him one final item, a sealed envelope with his name on it. Inside was a handwritten letter. "Detective Mitchell, by the time you read this, I'll be dead. Really dead this time. No more games, no more false identities. The cancer has seen to that. I know you see me as a monster, and you're not wrong. I sacrificed my humanity for knowledge, treated suffering as data. But that data has value beyond my crimes. I've watched hundreds of elderly people lose their autonomy. I've documented how it happens, why some fight and others surrender, what can be done to preserve dignity even in dependence. This knowledge could revolutionize elder care, if anyone has the courage to look past its origin. I don't ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I ask you to consider, what's worse, that this knowledge exists, or that obtaining it ethically would require watching millions suffer naturally what hundreds suffered by my design. The network was a mistake. I gave broken people power over the vulnerable and called it research. But their cruelty taught me something vital. The difference between controlling someone and caring for them is not in the actions, but in the intent. The same hands that bind can also heal. You have all my work now. Do with it what you think best. Destroy it, study it, lock it away. But know that every page represents someone whose suffering might mean others suffer less. I chose you because you see the human in every victim. You'll make the right choice. Marion Whitfield, or Sarah Henderson, or a dozen other names. P.S. Ellen was my greatest success and failure. I broke her, then watched her rebuild herself through genuine caregiving. She's the only one who truly learned from this. Don't punish her too harshly. Clarence stood in that basement laboratory, surrounded by the accumulated horror of decades, and faced an impossible choice. The data was invaluable but irredeemably tainted. Using it would validate Marion's methods. Destroying it would waste the suffering of her victims. Ellen was arrested but cooperative. She provided details about Marion's other identities, helping close dozens of cold cases. Her sentence was reduced in exchange for her cooperation, and she served 5 years. The research was eventually transferred to a secure FBI facility, where it remains under strict ethical review. Some insights have been carefully extracted and anonymized, contributing to better understanding of elder psychology and vulnerability. But the full files remain sealed, a reminder that some knowledge comes at too high a price. Clarence returned to Cedar Falls, to his regular caseload of wellness checks and elder abuse investigations. But he approached each one differently now, understanding the fine line between care and control, between protection and imprisonment. Elmer Dawson lived another 3 years, dying peacefully in his sleep at home. Before he died, he told Clarence something that stuck with him. That woman, Helen, she thought she was taking my power. But every day I survived, every moment I held on to my mind despite the drugs, I was resisting. She never really controlled me. She just controlled my body. My spirit remained free. It was the one thing Marion Whitfield, for all her research, had never understood. You could document dependency, chart the breaking points of autonomy, reduce human suffering to data points and graphs. But you could never truly capture the human spirit's capacity to endure, to resist, to remain unbroken despite everything. The wellness check that had started with a concerned neighbor had revealed a network of horror, a decades-long experiment in human suffering, and questions about the nature of knowledge itself. But it had also revealed something else: the strength of the vulnerable, the importance of vigilance, and the truth that checking on each other wasn't just a job. It was a sacred duty. Officer Lester Graham had responded to hundreds of domestic disturbance calls during his 8 years with the Phoenix Police Department. Most were noise complaints, arguments that got too loud, couples who needed to cool off. But the call that came in at 9:47 p.m. on a sweltering July evening would challenge everything he thought he knew about reading a situation. Unit 12, we have a reported domestic disturbance at 2847 Desert View Road. Dispatch crackled through his radio. Neighbor reports screaming, sounds of fighting. Possible child involved. Lester acknowledged and headed toward the address, a middle-class neighborhood on the outskirts of Phoenix where the desert began to reclaim the edges of civilization. His partner was out sick, so he'd be handling this one solo until backup arrived. The house was a single-story ranch, typical for the area, with a gravel front yard and cacti instead of grass. All the lights were on inside, unusual for this time of night. As Lester pulled up, he could hear raised voices from within, a man and woman arguing, and somewhere underneath, what sounded like a child crying. He called for backup, then approached the front door. Through the window, he could see movement, shadows passing back and forth rapidly. The arguing suddenly stopped. Lester knocked firmly. Phoenix Police. We received a complaint about a disturbance. Silence. Then whispered voices, urgent and hushed. The door opened partially, held by a chain. A man's face appeared in the gap. Earl Hoffman, according to the records Lester had pulled up en route. Mid-40s? Contractor. No criminal record. "Officer," Earl said, his voice strained but controlled. "Everything's fine here, just a disagreement that got a little loud." "I need to come in and make sure everyone's okay, Mr. Hoffman." "That's not necessary, we're fine." A woman appeared behind Earl, Dolores Hoffman, the wife. She was trying to smile, but Lester noticed her eyes were red from crying, and there was a fresh bruise forming on her cheek. "Ma'am, are you all right?" "Yes," Dolores said quickly, too quickly. "Just a misunderstanding." From somewhere in the house came a child's voice. "Mommy?" "That's our son, Billy," Earl said. "He's supposed to be in bed." Lester's instincts were screaming. Everything about this felt wrong. The forced casualness, Dolores's bruise, the way Earl was blocking the door. "I need to come in and verify everyone's safety," Lester said more firmly. "Please open the door." Earl and Dolores exchanged a look. Something passed between them, a silent communication that made Lester's hand drift toward his weapon. "Of course, officer," Earl finally said, unhooking the chain. The living room was in disarray. A lamp was knocked over, magazines scattered across the floor, a picture frame lying face down with glass shattered around it. But what caught Lester's attention was the child. Billy, who looked about 7, was standing in the hallway. His pajamas were clean, his face unmarked, but his eyes. There was something in his eyes that didn't belong on a child's face. Not fear, exactly, but a kind of watchful calculation. "Hey, buddy," Lester said gently. "Everything okay?" Billy looked at his parents before answering. "Yes, sir. Mommy and Daddy were just playing." "Playing?" "They play rough sometimes," Billy said matter-of-factly. Dolores moved quickly to the boy, putting her arms around him. "Billy needs to go back to bed." "In a moment," Lester said. "Mrs. Hoffman, can I speak with you privately?" "Whatever you need to say, you can say in front of my husband," Dolores replied, but her grip on Billy tightened. "It's protocol, ma'am. Just for a moment." Earl stepped forward. "She said no. We've been cooperative, officer, but this is harassment." Lester noticed Earl's knuckles were scraped and bloody. "Sir, your hands—" "I was fixing the fence earlier. Caught them on a nail." Everything they said had an answer, an explanation, but none of it felt right. The bruise on Dolores's face was fresh, probably less than an hour old. The destruction in the living room suggested violence, not just arguing. "Mrs. Hoffman, did your husband hit you?" "No," Dolores said immediately. "I fell. I tripped over Billy's toys and hit my face on the coffee table." Billy nodded eagerly. "I left my trucks out. It was my fault." The boy's readiness to take blame set off another alarm in Lester's head. This was rehearsed, scripted. "Billy, why don't you show me your room?" Lester suggested. "He needs to sleep," Earl said, moving between Lester and his son. "It'll just take a minute." The family exchanged those looks again, silent conversation flowing between them. Finally, Dolores nodded to Billy. "Show the officer your room, honey." Billy led Lester down the hallway. His room was pristine, almost unusually so for a 7-year-old. Toys were neatly arranged, bed perfectly made. On the wall were drawings, typical kid stuff mostly, but one caught Lester's eye. It showed 3 stick figures holding hands, but there was a 4th figure, separated from the others, lying on the ground. "Who's this?" Lester asked, pointing to the fallen figure. "Nobody," Billy said quickly. "Just a made-up person." "Billy, you know it's important to tell the truth to police officers, right?" The boy nodded solemnly. "Mommy and Daddy said to always tell the truth." "So what really happened tonight?" Billy glanced toward the door where his parents were hovering, just out of sight but clearly listening. "Mommy and Daddy were arguing about dinner. Mommy burned it. Daddy got upset. Then Mommy fell." The words came out robotically, like he was reciting lines. "Billy, are you scared?" For just a moment, the mask slipped. The boy's eyes filled with tears, but then he blinked and the emotion was gone, replaced by that unsettling calm. "No, sir. I'm not scared. We're a happy family." Lester returned to the living room where Earl and Dolores were standing exactly where he'd left them, like mannequins. "I think it would be best if you folks separated for the night," Lester said. "Mr. Hoffman, do you have somewhere you can stay?" "That won't be necessary," Earl said coldly. "We're fine." "Sir, I'm seeing signs of domestic violence." "You're seeing a family that had an argument," Earl interrupted. "My wife told you she fell. My son confirmed it. Unless you have evidence of a crime, I'd like you to leave our home." Technically, Earl was right. Without Dolores cooperating, without clear evidence of assault, Lester couldn't force the issue. But every instinct told him not to leave. His backup arrived then. Officer Janet Williams, a veteran who'd worked domestic cases for 15 years. Lester briefed her quietly outside. "Something's off," he said. "They're all lying, even the kid." Williams nodded. "I'll talk to the wife. Sometimes they open up more to female officers." But Dolores gave Williams the same story. Fell over toys, hit the coffee table. Earl was never violent. Everything was fine. The family presented a united front, impenetrable. As they prepared to leave, Billy suddenly ran up to Lester. "Officer, I forgot to show you something." He pressed a piece of paper into Lester's hand, then ran back to his parents. Lester unfolded it in his cruiser. It was another drawing, the same 3 figures, but now the 4th figure was standing, and there were bars between them and the family. Above the separated figure, Billy had written in crayon, "Help." Lester showed Williams the drawing. "We can't leave them. Without probable cause, this is a cry for help from the child." They returned to the door, but this time it didn't open. Earl spoke through it. "We've asked you to leave. You need a warrant to come back." "Mr. Hoffman, your son gave me something that concerns me." "My son has an active imagination. Good night, officers." They had no choice but to leave. But Lester couldn't shake the feeling that they were abandoning someone who needed help. He ran a deeper background check when he got back to the station. Earl Hoffman, clean record. Dolores Hoffman, née Patterson, clean except... Wait. There was a missing person report from 5 years ago, filed by her sister in California. It had been withdrawn 2 days later with a note that Dolores had been found safe. Lester dug deeper. The Hoffmans had moved to Phoenix 4 years ago from San Diego. Before that, Seattle. Before that, Minneapolis. Always moving, never staying more than a year or 2. He pulled school records for Billy. The boy had been enrolled in 3 different schools in 3 years. Teacher notes showed concerns. Billy seems afraid of making mistakes. Unusually quiet, reluctant to discuss home life. Perfect behavior, but seems anxious. Then Lester found something that made his blood run cold. In Minneapolis, there had been another child. Emma Hoffman, Billy's older sister. She'd died at age 9 from accidental fall downstairs. The case had been investigated but closed as accidental. The drawing Billy had made suddenly took on new meaning. The 4th figure wasn't separated. They were gone. Lester called Child Protective Services, but they couldn't act on a drawing and old concerns. He needed more. The next morning, he parked outside Billy's school. When Dolores dropped him off, Lester noticed she was wearing long sleeves despite the 100-degree heat. Billy saw his cruiser and their eyes met for a moment. The boy mouthed something that looked like, "Please." That afternoon, Lester got a call from dispatch, another domestic disturbance at the Hoffman house. This time, the neighbor reported hearing glass breaking and a child screaming. Lester raced to the scene, Williams right behind him. This time, they weren't taking no for an answer. The front door was locked, but they could hear chaos inside. Crashing, screaming, Billy crying. Probable cause established. "Phoenix Police, we're coming in!" Lester kicked the door. It took 3 tries before it splintered open. What they found inside was beyond anything he'd expected. The living room was destroyed. Furniture overturned, holes punched in walls, blood on the floor. But Earl and Dolores were standing calmly in the middle of it all, holding hands. Billy was nowhere to be seen. "Where's your son?" Lester demanded, weapon drawn. "In his room," Dolores said serenely. "He's safe." "Mrs. Hoffman, you're bleeding." Blood was running down her arm, soaking through her sleeve. "It's nothing." Lester kept his weapon on Earl while Williams went to find Billy. She returned moments later, her face pale. "The boy's room is empty. Windows open." Earl and Dolores didn't react. They just stood there, holding hands, smiling. "Where is Billy?" Lester shouted. "He's safe," Earl repeated. "We made sure of that." "What did you do?" Dolores tilted her head. "We did what we had to do, what we always do when things get too complicated." Lester noticed something then. Pill bottles on the kitchen counter, empty. A lot of them. "Call paramedics," he told Williams. "They've taken something." As Williams made the call, Earl spoke dreamily. "You don't understand. Billy isn't our son. Not really. He's something else. Something that came to us after Emma died." "What are you talking about?" "He knows things," Dolores said, her words starting to slur. "Things he shouldn't know. About Emma. About what we did." "What did you do to Emma?" "She was going to tell," Earl said, swaying slightly. "About the discipline. About the punishments. We couldn't let her destroy our family." "So, you killed her?" "It was an accident," Dolores insisted. "She fell. Just like I fell tonight." The paramedics arrived, but Earl and Dolores were fading fast. Whatever they'd taken was working quickly. "Where is Billy?" Lester pleaded. Earl smiled. "Gone. Like Emma. But he'll come back. He always comes back. That's his curse." They collapsed then, both of them, still holding hands. The paramedics worked frantically, but it was too late. Earl and Dolores Hoffman were dead. The search for Billy lasted 3 days. Every unit in Phoenix was looking. His picture was on every news channel. But it was like he'd vanished into the desert air. On the 4th day, Lester received a call that changed everything. A boy matching Billy's description had been found at a rest stop 50 miles outside Phoenix. But the trucker who found him said something odd. The kid was just sitting there, like he was waiting. When I asked if he was lost, he said, "Officer Lester will come for me." Lester drove out immediately. Billy was in the rest stop office, drinking hot chocolate, seemingly unharmed. When he saw Lester, he smiled. Not a child's smile, but something older, sadder. "Hello, Officer Lester." "Billy, everyone's been worried sick. Where have you been?" "Walking, thinking, waiting for it to be safe." "Safe from what?" Billy looked at him with those 2 old eyes. "From them. But they're gone now, aren't they? Earl and Dolores?" Lester noticed he didn't call them Mom and Dad. "How did you know they were gone?" "I always know when it's over, when it's time to move on." The boy was taken to Phoenix Children's Hospital for evaluation. Physically, he was fine. No signs of abuse, well-nourished, healthy. But the psychological evaluation was troubling. Dr. Sarah Mendez, the child psychiatrist, pulled Lester aside after her initial assessment. "This child has experienced severe trauma, but there's something else. His cognitive responses are unusual. He speaks about Earl and Dolores as if they were strangers, not his parents. And he keeps mentioning other families, other names." "What kind of names?" "The Andersons in Seattle. The Johnsons in Minneapolis." He says he lived with them, too. Lester's investigation had already uncovered the Hoffmans' moves, but Billy's medical records only went back 3 years. Before that, nothing. No birth certificate, no social security number, nothing official until he appeared with the Hoffmans in Minneapolis. "Billy," Lester said gently during one of his visits, "can you tell me about Emma?" Billy's face darkened. "She was their real daughter, their first. They hurt her like they hurt each other. But with her it went too far." "Were you there when she died?" "No, that was before me. But they told me about her, when they were angry. Said I could never replace her, that I was wrong, broken." He paused. "They weren't my first family to say that." "What do you mean, first family?" Billy pulled out a worn notebook from his backpack, something the searchers had missed. Inside were drawings, dozens of them, but also photographs. Old ones, Polaroids, and printed digitals. They showed Billy with different families, in different houses. But something was wrong with the dates written on them. One photo showed Billy with a family in front of a Christmas tree. 1995 was written on the back. Another showed him at a birthday party. 1988 scrawled in pen. In every photo, Billy looked exactly the same age. "Billy, these dates. I know they don't make sense," Billy said quietly. "Nothing about me makes sense. That's why families take me in. They think they're helping a poor orphan boy, but then things happen, bad things, and they blame me." Lester felt a chill despite the warm hospital room. "What kind of bad things?" "The Andersons in Seattle. The father started hitting the mother after I'd been there 6 months. Never did before. The Johnsons in Minneapolis. The mother became paranoid. Thought everyone was trying to steal me from her. The Hoffmans. You saw what happened there." "Are you saying you caused these things?" Billy shook his head. "I don't cause anything. I just bring out what's already there. The darkness people hide. It comes out when I'm around." This was impossible. Lester was a rational man, a cop who dealt in facts and evidence. But the photos... He took one to the station's tech expert, hoping to prove they were faked. But the analysis came back clean. These were authentic photographs, some decades old, based on the paper and chemical composition. Meanwhile, CPS was struggling to find placement for Billy. 3 foster families had already declined after meeting him. They all said the same thing. Something about the boy made them deeply uncomfortable. Then the calls started coming in. A family in Seattle, the Andersons Billy had mentioned. They'd seen his picture on the news. "That boy lived with us in 1994, Mrs. Anderson insisted. "He hasn't aged a day. After he left, my husband shot himself. Said he couldn't live with what he'd become." A woman in Minneapolis, Jennifer Johnson. "He was with us in 2001. My husband became convinced Billy was evil. Tried to perform an exorcism. I had to have him committed. He's still in the psychiatric ward." More calls, more families, going back decades. Always the same story. A boy who didn't age, families that fell apart, violence that erupted from nowhere. Lester visited Billy again, armed with this information. "How old are you really, Billy?" The boy looked out the window for a long moment. "I stopped counting after 50 years. "That's impossible." "Is it? You've seen the photos. You've talked to the families." "There has to be an explanation." Billy turned to him with those ancient eyes in that child's face. "Officer Lester, what would you do if you couldn't grow up? If you were stuck watching families take you in, love you, then slowly destroy themselves? Would you try to help? Run away? Or would you eventually just accept it? Why don't you age?" "I don't know. I remember being normal once, long ago. I had a real family. Then something happened, An illness. An accident. I can't remember clearly. I woke up in a hospital, and time just stopped for me. Dr. Mendez had run every test imaginable. Billy's cells showed no signs of aging. His telomeres didn't shorten. His metabolism was unlike anything in medical literature. It was scientifically impossible, yet undeniable. The families that take you in, why do they become violent? Billy pulled his knees to his chest, suddenly looking like the child he appeared to be. I think it's because I'm wrong, an anomaly. People sense it subconsciously. It brings out their worst instincts, protectiveness that becomes possession, fear that becomes anger, love that becomes obsession. The Hoffmans killed their daughter before you came to them. Yes, they were already broken. I thought maybe a family that had already fallen apart wouldn't be affected. I was wrong. I made them worse. Lester thought about the domestic disturbance call, how perfectly orchestrated the family's lies had been, how they'd worked together to hide the truth even while destroying each other. They were protecting you. In their twisted way, yes. They thought if you took me, I'd reveal what they did to Emma. But also, I think part of them genuinely cared about me. That's what made it worse. The love and the violence got all mixed up. That evening, Lester got a call from Dr. Mendez. We have a problem. Billy's gone. He'd walked out of the hospital, somehow bypassing security cameras and locked doors. A nurse reported seeing him in the parking lot, but when security arrived, he'd vanished. 3 days later, a report came in from Albuquerque. A boy matching Billy's description had been taken in by a family who found him at a bus stop. The Hendersons, a middle-aged couple with no children of their own. Lester drove to Albuquerque immediately. The Hendersons were a normal couple, teachers, both of them, kind-hearted people who couldn't stand to see a child alone. He said his name was Timothy, Mrs. Henderson explained. Said he'd run away from foster care. Where is he now? In his room. Such a sweet boy, but... She hesitated. My husband and I have been arguing since he arrived. Little things, but getting worse. It's not like us. Lester found Billy Timothy in a small bedroom, drawing. The picture showed a house with happy people outside and darkness pressing against the windows. You can't keep doing this, Lester said. What else can I do? Billy asked without looking up. I need somewhere to live. I'm still 7 years old in every way that matters. I need food, shelter, care. But you destroy every family that takes you in. Not destroy. Reveal. I show them what they really are underneath. He finally looked up. The Hendersons seem nice. Maybe they're strong enough. And if they're not, then I'll move on, like I always do. Lester wanted to arrest him, to stop him, but for what? Being a child? Having an impossible condition? He had no authority here, no jurisdiction, no crime to charge. Let me help you, Lester said. There must be somewhere safe for you. Billy smiled sadly. Where? A laboratory where they'll study me? An institution where they'll contain me? I've tried those. They're worse than the families. Over the next 2 weeks, Lester watched from a distance as the Hendersons began to change. Mr. Henderson became possessive, following Billy everywhere. Mrs. Henderson started drinking, something she'd never done before. They fought constantly, always about Billy. Was he safe enough, loved enough, disciplined enough? Then came the inevitable call. Domestic disturbance at the Henderson residence. When Lester arrived, he found a familiar scene. Broken furniture, tears, accusations. But this time, Billy was standing in the middle of it all, not hiding. Stop, the boy said to the Hendersons, and they did. This is what I am. This is what I do. I'm poison to families. You need to let me go. Mrs. Henderson was sobbing. We just wanted to help you. I know. That's what makes it worse. Billy walked out with Lester, leaving the Hendersons broken but alive. In the car, he was quiet for a long time. I tried to die once, he finally said. Jumped off a bridge. Woke up in the morgue 3 days later. The family that had me then thought I was a demon after that. What are you? Cursed? Sick? A medical miracle? Does it matter? I am what I am. A child who can't grow up, who brings out the worst in those who try to love me. There has to be a way to break this cycle. Billy looked out the window at the passing desert. Officer Lester, you have a family, a wife, 2 daughters. I've seen the photos on your desk. Lester's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Yes. Do you love them? More than anything. Then stay away from me. Don't try to help. Don't try to save me. Because if you take me in, even temporarily, I'll destroy them too. That's not a threat. It's just what happens. They drove in silence until they reached the Phoenix city limits. Billy asked to be let out at a bus station. I can't just leave you here. Yes, you can. You have to. Billy pulled out his notebook, tore out a page. This is every family I remember, every incident. Give it to someone who might understand. Maybe someday they'll figure out what I am. Billy. My name isn't Billy. It hasn't been Billy for 40 years. I don't remember my real name anymore. He walked into the bus station, small and alone, a child who would never grow up, carrying a curse he didn't understand. Lester watched him go, knowing he should stop him, knowing he couldn't. The page Billy had given him contained over 100 names, dates going back to the 1940s. Each entry ended the same way. Family destroyed. Moved on. 6 months passed before Lester heard about Billy again. A domestic murder-suicide in Tucson. The Brennan family. Parents dead, but their adopted son, a 7-year-old named Michael, was missing. The description matched Billy perfectly. This time, Lester didn't wait for official channels. He drove to Tucson immediately, arriving at a crime scene that felt hauntingly familiar. The house was in chaos, blood on the walls, neighbors reporting weeks of escalating fights. And in the child's room, he found the drawings. The same style, the same themes of families separating, darkness creeping in. The detective on the case, Ray Espinoza, was frustrated. The kid's like a ghost. No official records, no history before 3 months ago when the Brennans took him in. I know who he is, Lester said, and told him everything. Espinoza looked at him like he was insane until Lester showed him the documentation. The photos, the list of families, the medical reports from Dr. Mendez. This is impossible, Espinoza said. I thought so too, but he's real and he's out there. Probably looking for another family already. They found Billy 3 days later, but not where they expected. He was in a children's hospital, sitting beside the bed of a young girl with leukemia. The nurses said he'd been there for 2 days, just holding her hand, talking to her. When he saw Lester, Billy didn't run. He looked exhausted, older somehow despite his unchanging face. She's dying, Billy said simply. Her name is Grace. Her family abandoned her when they couldn't afford the treatment. She's been alone for weeks. Billy, the Brennans. I know. I felt it happening. The father had PTSD from Iraq, never treated. The mother was bipolar, off her medication. They hid it well, even from each other, until I came along. You have to stop this. I tried something different this time, Billy said, still holding Grace's hand. I thought maybe if I was around someone already dying, already broken, I couldn't make it worse. And? Billy looked at the machines keeping Grace alive. She's peaceful when I'm here. The nurses say she sleeps better, seems less afraid. Maybe I don't poison everyone. Maybe it's only the healthy ones, the ones pretending to be whole." Grace's eyes fluttered open. She smiled at Billy. "You came back. I promised I would." Lester watched them, this impossible child and this dying girl, and saw something he hadn't seen before. Billy at peace. "How long has she got?" Lester asked a nurse. "Days, maybe a week." For that week, Billy stayed. Lester arranged it somehow, convincing hospital administration, CPS, even getting Dr. Mendez to consult. And for that week, nothing bad happened. No violence erupted, no darkness spread. Billy just sat with Grace, reading to her, holding her hand, being present for someone who had no one else. When Grace died, Billy was holding her hand. She went peacefully, smiling. It was the first time in decades, Billy said, that he'd been with someone at the end without causing it. "She wasn't afraid," Billy told Lester afterward. "Even knowing what I am, she wasn't afraid." "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That I was old, that I was cursed, that families died around me. She said it didn't matter. She said everyone was cursed in their own way." That night, Billy disappeared again. But this time, he left a different kind of note. "Officer Lester, I'm going to try something new. There are places where the already broken gather. Hospices, terminal wards, places where death is expected. Maybe that's where I belong, not with families trying to build lives, but with those preparing to leave them. Maybe my curse can be a comfort to those who have nothing left to lose. Don't look for me, but know that Grace taught me something. I don't have to be poison. I can be medicine, just for a very specific disease, the disease of dying alone." Lester kept the note, added it to his file on Billy. Over the years, he would occasionally hear rumors. A boy who didn't age volunteering at hospices, sitting with the dying, somehow making their final days easier. The families of the dying reported feeling strangely calm around him, accepting rather than raging against the end. 5 years later, Lester got a call from a hospice in Portland. They had a young patient, a boy with progeria, the rapid aging disease. He looked ancient despite being only 15. He'd asked for Officer Lester by name. Lester flew to Portland immediately. The boy was indeed dying, aged beyond his years. But sitting beside his bed was Billy, unchanged, still 7 years old in appearance. "Hello, Officer Lester," Billy said. "This is Marcus. He wanted to meet you." Marcus spoke with difficulty, his voice creaky with premature age. "Billy told me about you, about how you tried to help him." "I didn't do much." "You saw him as a person, not a monster. That matters." Marcus gripped Billy's hand. "We're opposites, you know. He can't age, I age too fast, but we understand each other." Over the next 3 days, Lester watched Billy care for Marcus. There was no darkness, no violence, just two children caught in impossible bodies, finding comfort in their shared curse. When Marcus died, Billy grieved. Real tears, real sorrow. It was the most human Lester had ever seen him. "I can feel it when they go," Billy said. "Each one takes a piece of something dark with them, like they're absolving me, one death at a time." "How many?" "Hundreds now, maybe thousands. I don't count anymore. I just sit with them, hold their hands, prove they're not alone." "And families? Do you ever try again?" Billy shook his head. "That part of me is broken. I can comfort the dying, but I destroy the living. It's my nature." "That's not true. You didn't destroy me." Billy smiled sadly. "Because you kept your distance. You never tried to save me. just to understand me. That's why you survived." Before leaving Portland, Lester asked one last question. "Do you remember your real name yet?" Billy thought for a long moment. "James, I think it was James. James Hartley from a farm in Iowa. But that was 1943. That boy is as dead as the families I've destroyed." Lester never saw Billy again, but he kept tabs on the rumors. A child who appeared at hospices and terminal wards across the country. Never staying long, never aging, always moving on. Some called him an angel, others a ghost. The medical community occasionally tried to study him, but he always vanished before they could. One day, 15 years after their first meeting, Lester received a package. Inside was a photo, Billy standing with a group of hospice workers, all smiling. On the back was written, "Found my family. They die and are replaced, but they all understand. I'm not poison here. I'm peace. Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I'd given up on myself. James, Billy." Lester framed the photo, kept it on his desk next to pictures of his own family. When other officers asked about it, he'd just say it was a kid he'd helped once, which was true in a way. The domestic disturbance call that had started with the Hoffmans had led to an impossible discovery. A child frozen in time, cursed to destroy families who had found redemption in comforting the dying. It wasn't a happy ending, but it was an ending with purpose. Lester retired 5 years later, but he never forgot Billy James. Sometimes, late at night, he'd wonder if the boy was still out there, still 7 years old, still holding the hands of the dying, still carrying his impossible burden. The last report Lester heard was from a hospice in Maine. A 7-year-old boy had spent 3 months there, sitting with dozens of patients as they passed. The staff said he brought a strange peace to the ward, that death seemed less frightening when he was around. Then, as always, he vanished, moving on to the next place where death waited, where his curse became a blessing, where a child who couldn't grow old helped others face the ultimate transition. The domestic disturbance had revealed something beyond crime or abuse. It had shown Lester that sometimes the real monsters were the normal families, and sometimes the real angels were the cursed children who exposed them. Billy had been both victim and catalyst, poison and medicine, a child and an ancient soul. And somewhere out there, he still was.